I was told over and over that I was not welcome at any family event. My mother actually screamed through the phone that luxury events are for real family only. So when I finally got married to a man whose family came from actual wealth, I made sure my biological relatives were not invited. They completely lost their minds demanding to fix things and even crashed my wedding reception to save face in front of high society. But they did not know I had already made one phone call that would end their perfect little charade forever, right there in front of the entire country club. My name is Chloe Hayes. I am 29 years old and I work as a corporate accountant in Chicago. For as long as I can remember, I truly believed that if I just paid enough of my family's bills, if I swallowed my pride and smiled through enough of their backhanded insults, they would eventually love me. I thought my financial support could buy my way into their hearts. I was wrong. It took a freezing storm and a crushing betrayal for me to finally understand that to them, I was never a daughter or a sister. I was just a walking wallet. The story of how I brought my family's entire fake empire crashing down begins in the middle of a torrential downpour outside the Oak Brook Country Club. It was a Saturday afternoon in late October. The wind was howling, whipping icy rain across the manicured lawns and sweeping dead leaves across the grand circular driveway. I was standing perfectly still in the freezing downpour, shivering uncontrollably in my thin beige trench coat. My only good pair of professional heels was completely ruined, submerged in a muddy puddle right outside the grand entrance. My arms were burning. I was holding a massive heavy box wrapped in expensive silver paper with a giant white bow. Inside was a $400 premium stroller set. It was the exact model my older sister Sarah had added to her baby registry, the one she complained she simply had to have but could not afford on her own. I had worked 10 hours of overtime at the accounting firm just to buy it for her baby shower today. I wanted to be the good sister. I wanted to be a part of the celebration. Through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of the country club, I could see the golden warm light spilling out onto the wet pavement. I could see the silhouettes of women in elegant pastel dresses sipping mimosas and laughing. I could hear the muffled, lively sounds of a jazz trio playing upbeat tunes. It looked like a scene straight out of a luxury lifestyle magazine. It looked warm. It looked perfectly happy. And then there was me standing outside in the bitter cold. A few feet away from me stood the country club security guard. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man holding a laminated clipboard tight against his chest to protect it from the horizontal rain. He looked at me with deep, unmistakable pity. I had just given him my name, Chloe Hayes. I told him I was the biological sister of the guest of honor. I told him there must be a mistake. The guard sighed, shaking his head slowly. He ran his finger down the guest list one more time just to be absolutely sure. He told me he was incredibly sorry, but my name was not on the list. He explained that Mrs. Barbara Hayes, my mother, had personally curated this list and handed it to the event staff that morning. She had given strict, explicit instructions that no unlisted walk-ins were to be permitted under any circumstances. She had heavily stressed the high-profile nature of the Montgomery family to the country club management. Greg Montgomery is my sister Sarah's husband. Greg's family comes from money, or at the very least, they project the illusion of generational wealth with terrifying perfection. From the moment Sarah started dating Greg, my mother began worshipping the Montgomerys. She spent every waking moment trying to prove that the Hayes family belonged in their elite social circle. She bought clothes she could not afford, leased cars that stretched my father's meager budget to the breaking point, and constantly criticized my practical, frugal lifestyle. To Barbara, I was a painful reminder of our working-class roots, and apparently, I did not fit into the wealthy illusion she was trying to sell today. I stood there, the heavy silver box pressing painfully into my ribs. The rain was soaking entirely through my coat, pasting my hair to my face and dripping down my neck. I refused to cry in front of the security guard. I told myself it had to be a simple oversight. My mother was always disorganized when she tried to plan large events. She probably just forgot to write my name down in the chaotic rush of dealing with florists and caterers. I shifted the heavy box to my hip, my fingers numb and slippery from the cold water, and I pulled out my phone from my pocket. I dialed my mother's number. It rang 4 times. With every ring, a cold sense of dread crept further up my spine. Finally, the line clicked open. I could immediately hear the clinking of crystal glasses and the loud, joyous chatter of the party echoing through the speaker. My mother answered with a sharp, incredibly annoyed sigh. She demanded to know why I was calling her during such an important social event. I kept my voice as steady as I possibly could. I told her I was standing right outside the front doors in the rain. I told her the security guard would not let me in because my name was not on the registry list. I asked her to please come out to the lobby and tell him it was a mistake so I could come inside and dry off. The background noise on the phone suddenly grew muffled, like she was walking rapidly into a quiet hallway or aggressively pressing her hand over her mouth. When she spoke again, her voice dropped to a harsh, venomous whisper that cut right through the sound of the storm. She told me it was not a mistake. She told me she had left me off the list on purpose. My breath caught hard in my throat. I asked her why. I told her I had her expensive gift, that I had rushed straight from closing out accounts at work, that I was freezing to death on the pavement. Barbara did not care. She hissed into the phone, her tone dripping with absolute unfiltered disgust. She said Greg's extremely wealthy parents were inside mingling. She said all of Greg's elite country club friends and business partners were there evaluating our family. She said this event needed to be absolutely flawless to secure Sarah's permanent place in their high society circle. Then she said the words that finally shattered the illusion of family. I had been blindly clinging to my entire life. She told me I was just a gloomy, boring accountant who did not know how to dress for high society. She said my practical clothes and my serious demeanor would ruin the entire aesthetic of the luxury party she had designed. She screamed through the receiver, "I have told you over and over, these events are for real family only. Greg's parents are evaluating us today. You do not belong here. Go home. Real family only." The phrase hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. I was her biological daughter. I was Sarah's younger sister. We grew up in the same house. But to them, real family meant people who looked the part. Real family meant people who elevated their perceived social status. I was just the reliable workhorse. I was the one who balanced their overdrawn budgets, filed their complicated taxes for free every single April, and quietly cleaned up their constant financial messes while they lived out their wealthy fantasies. I was good enough to balance their checkbooks in the background, but not good enough to sit at their table in the light. But the most sickening twist of all, the pure agonizing irony of this entire humiliating moment, was the undeniable financial reality of the room my mother was currently standing in. I did not just buy the $400 stroller I was holding in the rain, I bought the entire party. 2 weeks ago, Sarah had completely maxed out every single one of her credit cards, buying designer maternity clothes and imported nursery furniture to impress her wealthy mother-in-law. They had absolutely zero liquidity left in their bank accounts. The country club had suddenly demanded the final catering and venue deposit, threatening to cancel the baby shower entirely if the funds were not secured within 24 hours. My mother had called me in an absolute hysterical panic. She was hyperventilating, crying loudly into the phone, begging me to save them from total social ruin. She pleaded with me to put the $3,500 venue deposit on my personal corporate credit card. She swore to me on her life that Greg was waiting on a massive guaranteed business bonus from his firm, and that she would have a thick envelope of cash waiting for me at the front door the exact moment I arrived at the shower today. Because I was stupid, because I desperately wanted to prove my value to my own mother, I agreed. I had to transfer money out of my own hard-earned emergency savings account just to clear enough room on my credit card so the massive charge would not bounce. I authorized the payment. I personally saved their precious high society event from being cancelled and deeply embarrassing them. And now I was literally standing in the freezing rain, locked out of a party that I had paid for. My hands shook violently, partly from the biting cold penetrating my bones, but mostly from the sheer blinding rage welling up inside my chest. I spoke into the phone, my voice dropping to a low, trembling register. I reminded her about the $3,500 I had fronted for this exact venue. I asked her where my envelope of cash was. My mother let out a sharp, mocking scoff. She sounded genuinely irritated that I would dare to bring up money at a time like this. She told me not to be so incredibly dramatic about a few $1,000s. She sharply reminded me that I make a good salary as a corporate accountant and that I have no husband or children to spend my money on. She told me I should just consider the venue deposit my ultimate generous gift to the new baby. She actually had the audacity to say that a good supportive aunt would not nickel and dime her own pregnant sister over a party. She told me to stop embarrassing myself in front of the club security, turn around and go back to my depressing little apartment. Then, without another word, the line went dead. She hung up on me. For 29 years of my life, my default response to my family treating me like absolute garbage was to simply retreat and swallow the pain. The old Chloe would have walked right back to her 10-year-old sedan, dragging that heavy silver gift box through the freezing mud. The old Chloe would have sat behind the steering wheel completely soaked to the bone, shivering in the cold and sobbing until her chest physically ached. She would have made countless excuses for them. She would have told herself that maybe her mother was just under a massive amount of stress, trying to impress the wealthy in-laws. She would have convinced herself that being uninvited was somehow her own fault for not dressing well enough or not being elegant enough for a luxury country club. But as I stood there in the pouring rain, staring at the dead screen of my phone, something fundamental and permanent shifted inside my chest. The icy rain was dripping down my collar and soaking my blouse, but my blood was suddenly running blazing hot. I was not going to cry in my car today. I was not going to drive back to my lonely apartment and wait in the dark for them to throw me another pathetic crumb of fake affection. I had just paid $3,500 of my own hard-earned savings for a spectacular party that I was explicitly banned from attending. The absolute least I deserved was to secure my itemized payment receipt from the venue manager so I could file it away and force them to look at the numbers the next time they claimed I never did anything to support this family. I did not go back to my car. Instead, I tightened my grip on the heavy $400 stroller set and bypassed the grand front entrance with its glowing crystal chandeliers and the snobby security guard. I carried that massive box around the side of the sprawling brick building, navigating carefully through the slippery wet grass and the manicured luxury bushes. I kept walking until I found the service entrance hidden near the loading dock. The heavy industrial metal doors were propped wide open to let the intense heat and steam out of the massive commercial kitchen. The rich, mouth-watering smell of roasted beef tenderloin and expensive truffle appetizers hit my face immediately. It was a stark, incredibly cruel reminder of the extreme luxury I was actively funding from the outside. I slipped inside the building. Nobody stopped me or even looked twice at me. The catering staff was running frantically back and forth, carrying heavy silver trays and shouting orders over the loud hum of the industrial ovens. I kept my head down, clutching my ruined wet coat tightly around my shivering body, and made my way down the long, dimly lit, carpeted back hallway, looking for the main office. My ruined heels squeaked softly on the floor, leaving little watery footprints behind me. I turned the corner at the end of the hall and instantly froze in my tracks. Right there at the very end of the corridor was the VIP bridal suite. The heavy carved mahogany door was cracked open just a few inches. Warm golden light spilled out into the dim hallway, illuminating the expensive floral carpet. And then I heard it. It was laughter. High-pitched, joyful, completely unbothered laughter. It was my sister Sarah and my mother Barbara. I pressed my back flat against the cool, expensive wallpaper, just out of sight, and held my breath. Some pathetic, desperate part of my inner child thought maybe I would hear them talking about how guilty they felt. Maybe my mother was telling Sarah she felt terrible for being so harsh and making me stand out in the freezing storm. I was still desperately craving a tiny sliver of humanity from the women who raised me. Instead, I heard the sharp, elegant sound of crystal champagne glasses clinking together in a toast. Then Sarah spoke, and her voice was dripping with pure, venomous mockery. She was laughing so hard, she could barely get the words out. I cannot believe Chloe actually put her personal card down for the deposit. She is so desperate for us to include her, it is actually embarrassing. Just block her phone number for a few weeks so we do not have to listen to her whine about paying her back. She will get over it. She always gets over it. My stomach violently dropped. The floor beneath my feet felt like it was dissolving into thin air. Block my number. Do not pay me back. This was not a panicked mistake caused by party planning stress. This was not a temporary lapse in judgment. This was a calculated, premeditated financial theft. They had planned to drain my bank account and lock me out in the rain from the very beginning. Then my mother chimed in. Her tone was so casual and so incredibly heartless that it made me physically nauseous. Exactly, my mother replied, taking a slow sip of her drink. She's just a walking wallet. We throw her a bone once a year, and she pays for whatever we need. A walking wallet. The words echoed in my mind. Every single time I had paid for my mother's car repairs. Every time I had quietly covered Sarah's overdue electric bills so her power would not get shut off. Every expensive birthday dinner I funded. I thought I was showing them how much I loved them. I thought I was being a good daughter and a supportive sister. They just saw me as an ATM machine that they could abuse and discard whenever it suited their aesthetic. But it was the very next sentence out of my mother's mouth that made the blood freeze entirely in my veins. My mother let out a sharp little sigh of relief and said, "Good thing her name is not anywhere near your mortgage paperwork anymore, or she would absolutely try to hold this venue deposit over our heads forever." Mortgage paperwork. Those two words echoed in my ears, completely drowning out the live jazz music playing out in the main ballroom. Mortgage paperwork. Why in the world would my name ever be anywhere near Sarah and Greg's mortgage paperwork? 2 years ago, Sarah and Greg had purchased a massive $1.2 million estate in the wealthiest suburb of the city. Greg constantly bragged to anyone who would listen about his massive cash down payment and his absolutely flawless credit score. He loved to parade his fake wealth around. I was just the boring corporate accountant who drove a used sedan and lived in a modest apartment. My name had absolutely no business being mentioned in the exact same breath as their luxury real estate. Unless my mind started racing at a terrifying speed, pulling together years of deep financial knowledge. You do not talk about taking someone's name off mortgage paperwork unless their name was put on the paperwork in the first place. I leaned against the wall, feeling entirely sick to my stomach. 2 years ago, my parents had asked to borrow my physical social security card and my driver's license, claiming they needed to update an old family life insurance policy. I had handed my documents over without a single second thought because they were my parents, and you are supposed to trust your parents. Had they used my documents? Had they stolen my identity to secretly co-sign a massive jumbo loan for Greg and Sarah? Greg was a man who lived entirely on high-interest credit cards to fund his country club lifestyle. The bank never would have approved him for $1 million loan on his own. But my credit score was a perfect 800. My debt-to-income ratio as a strict corporate accountant was absolutely flawless. I was the perfect financial ghost to prop up their luxury facade. The betrayal was so deep and so entirely monstrous that it knocked the breath completely out of my lungs. They did not just view me as a walking wallet. They viewed me as disposable collateral damage. If Greg and Sarah defaulted on $1 million mansion, I would be the one held legally responsible. My entire career as a certified public accountant would be instantly destroyed by a federal bankruptcy. They were actively risking my entire future just so Sarah could pretend to be a rich housewife. I stood in that service hallway shivering in my ruined, soaking wet clothes and realized that my mother was right about one thing. I was a boring corporate accountant, and that meant I knew exactly how money moved, and I knew exactly how to stop it. I set the heavy silver gift box silently on the carpeted floor, abandoning the expensive stroller set forever. I pulled my phone out of my wet pocket. My hands were shaking so violently from the adrenaline that I could barely unlock the digital screen. I opened my primary banking app. I navigated straight to my Platinum credit card portal. When I paid the $3,500 deposit earlier that morning, the country club manager had specifically warned me about their strict billing policy. He told me that the remaining catering and open bar balance, a massive $10,000 charge, would be automatically processed on the card on file exactly 1 hour after the event officially started. I looked at the digital clock at the very top of my phone screen. The baby shower had started exactly 50 minutes ago. The country club billing department was scheduled to process a $10,000 charge on my personal credit card in exactly 10 minutes. My mother and my sister were sitting just 20 feet away from me, drinking expensive champagne and laughing, completely confident that my credit limit was about to cover the cost of their luxury high society lifestyle. They thought I was sitting out in the cold parking lot crying over their cruel rejection. I took a deep breath. The shaking in my hands suddenly completely stopped. A profound icy calmness washed over my entire body from head to toe. I tapped the settings menu on my credit card dashboard. I found the security section. I stared at the bright red button on the screen that read, "Report card, stolen lock account." In the past, I would have hesitated. I would have thought about the immense social embarrassment it would cause them. I would have worried about ruining Sarah's special day with her wealthy mother-in-law. But the cruel echo of my mother laughing and calling me a walking wallet was still ringing crystal clear in my ears. With a resolute, firm press of my thumb, I tapped the red button. The screen loaded for a split second before a bright green checkmark appeared. Account successfully locked. All pending and future transactions will be immediately declined. I did not make a single sound. I left the expensive gift sitting right there in the shadows. I turned around and walked back down the long corridor, out the heavy metal doors, and back into the freezing rain. This time, the bitter cold did not bother me at all. I walked straight to my car, holding my head high. I slid into the driver's seat and turned on the engine, letting the warm heater blast over my freezing hands. I watched the digital clock on my dashboard tick forward. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 5 minutes. Exactly 8 minutes after I locked my credit card, my phone illuminated the dark interior of my car. It was a frantic text message from my mother. "Chloe, what did you do to your card? The venue manager just came over to our table right in front of Greg's parents. Your card was declined for the catering balance. You need to call your bank right now and fix this. They are threatening to stop serving the food to the guests." 10 seconds later, another text came through. "Answer your phone immediately. You are humiliating us in front of the Montgomery family." Then another text popped up. "The manager is threatening to shut down the entire party and ask everyone to leave the premises. Call the bank." I sat in the quiet, comforting warmth of my car and read those frantic, desperate messages. The toxic power dynamic of our entire relationship had shifted in a single tap on a screen. They were no longer holding the keys to my self-worth. They were holding a completely empty bag in front of the very people they wanted to impress. I typed my response slowly, making sure every single word was perfectly clear. "Events are for real family. Real family can pay their own bills." I hit send. Then I turned my phone on silent mode, completely cutting off the chaotic social meltdown I knew was happening inside that luxury country club. I put the car in drive and pulled out of the parking lot, leaving the glowing chandeliers and the fake smiles far behind me. I had a much bigger problem to deal with now. The $3,500 deposit I lost was absolutely nothing compared to the terrifying federal secret I had just uncovered in the hallway. I merged onto the highway, the rain washing my windshield clean. I was driving straight to my apartment to pull my comprehensive credit report and find out exactly what they meant about that mortgage paperwork. The heavy rain hammered relentlessly against the windshield of my car as I merged onto the highway, leaving the glowing lights of the Oak Brook Country Club far behind me. The rhythmic squeak of the windshield wipers was the only sound inside the dark cabin, but my mind was completely consumed by a deafening roar of realization. Mortgage paperwork. My mother's careless, venomous words echoed over and over in the confined space of my car. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned completely white. I am a professional corporate accountant. I spend 50 hours a week analyzing complex financial structures, identifying hidden liabilities, and locating missing funds for major corporate clients. I know exactly how money moves, and I know exactly what it means when someone mentions a name being removed from a mortgage. But to understand why that single phrase terrified me to my absolute core, you have to understand the role I was forced to play in my family for my entire adult life. I was the dedicated, silent family fixer. Growing up, I quickly learned that the only way to earn even a fraction of my parents' attention was to be overwhelmingly useful. My older sister, Sarah, was the undisputed golden child. She was pampered, praised, and protected from every single consequence of her own actions. When it was time for college, my parents proudly paid Sarah's out-of-state private university tuition in full without a second thought. When it was my turn. 2 years later, my father Richard sat me down and told me I needed to be practical. He said they had exhausted their savings on Sarah's education and that I would need to take out federal student loans and figure out how to survive at a local public state college. I did not complain. I adapted. I worked 3 separate part-time jobs while taking a full course load just to keep my head above water. I studied late into the night, surviving on cheap ramen and sheer willpower, while Sarah was posting photos of her fully funded spring break trips to Mexico. When I graduated with honors and earned my certified public accountant license, my parents did not throw me a party. They simply handed me a shoebox full of their disorganized, crumpled receipts and told me it was time for me to start pulling my weight and giving back to the family. For nearly 10 years, I was their free personal accountant. Every single April, I spent my weekends sitting at my parents' cramped kitchen table, untangling their chaotic finances, saving them thousands of dollars in professional tax preparation fees, and keeping them safely under the radar of the Internal Revenue Service. I balanced their checkbooks when they overspent. I created strict budgeting spreadsheets for them to follow. They never once thanked me. They just expected my free labor as a mandatory tax for existing in their family. The financial demands only escalated when Sarah met Greg Montgomery. Greg was a man who constructed his entire personality around the desperate illusion of generational wealth. He loved to project the image of an old money elite. He leased luxury sports cars he could barely afford the minimum monthly payments on, and he constantly name-dropped wealthy country club members who barely knew who he was. My parents were completely mesmerized by his superficial charm. They were working-class people who desperately craved access to high society, and Greg was their golden ticket. To keep up with Greg's extravagant lifestyle, my parents began making terrible financial decisions. They completely drained their retirement accounts to pay for Sarah and Greg's massive lavish wedding because Greg insisted his prominent business partners would expect nothing less than absolute perfection. When Sarah maxed out her credit cards buying designer clothes to fit in with Greg's wealthy friends, my parents would quietly beg me to transfer money from my emergency savings to cover the minimum payments so Greg would not find out. Family help. Family, my mother Barbara would constantly say whenever she needed my money. But that golden rule only ever flowed in one direction. It flowed directly out of my bank account and into the bottomless pit of their vanity. My phone sitting on the passenger seat beside me began to vibrate violently against the leather upholstery. The bright screen illuminated the dark car, cutting through the shadows. The caller identification displayed my father's name, Richard. I stared at the glowing screen and let it ring. It rang continuously, filling the silent car with a frantic, demanding energy. I did not reach for it. 10 seconds later, a notification pinged on my dashboard display, indicating a new voice message. In the past, my chest would have tightened with severe anxiety. The old Chloe would have immediately pulled over to the shoulder of the highway, panicking over whatever crisis they had manufactured to blame me for. But the girl who was desperately seeking her parents' approval had died the moment I heard my mother call me a walking wallet in that back hallway. I connected my phone to the car's Bluetooth system and pressed play. My father's voice blasted through the car speakers, completely lacking any trace of paternal warmth or basic human concern. "Chloe, what is wrong with you?" His voice was a harsh, booming reprimand that echoed off the glass of the windshield. "Your mother is in absolute tears in the country club lobby right now. The venue manager just humiliated us in front of Greg's entire family. He marched right up to our table and announced that your credit card was declined for the catering balance. Greg's wealthy parents are watching this entire disaster unfold, and they are looking at us like we are common trash." He paused to take a sharp, angry breath, and I could hear the loud, chaotic background noise of the party behind him. "You are humiliating us, Chloe. You are humiliating your pregnant sister on the most important day of her life over a petty, childish temper tantrum. I do not care what imaginary financial crisis you think you are having. I do not care if you have to empty your own savings account. You need to call your bank, unfreeze that credit card, and authorize the venue payment right this exact second. The manager is threatening to cut off the food service and ask our guests to leave the premises. Fix this right now, or do not bother ever showing your face in our family again." The voicemail ended with a sharp click, leaving a heavy, ringing silence in the car. I kept my eyes locked perfectly straight ahead on the dark, slick highway. There were absolutely no tears falling down my cheeks. There was no shaking in my hands. The desperate, eager to please daughter, who had spent 10 years balancing their checkbooks, had vanished completely. In her place was an experienced corporate auditor staring down a massive, glaring discrepancy. "Fix this right now, or do not bother ever showing your face in our family again." For 29 years, they had used the threat of exclusion to control me. They constantly dangled their conditional love just out of my reach, promising that if I just paid one more bill, if I just worked one more free weekend doing their taxes, they would finally accept me as real family. But standing outside in the freezing rain had finally broken the spell. I did not want to show my face in their family ever again. I wanted to protect my own future from whatever financial catastrophe they had secretly tied my name to. Good thing her name is not anywhere near your mortgage paperwork anymore. The pieces of a terrifying puzzle were rapidly assembling themselves in my mind as I took the exit toward my neighborhood. 2 years ago, Sarah and Greg had purchased a sprawling $1.2 million estate in an exclusive gated community. It was a massive purchase that made absolutely no mathematical sense. I knew Greg's income from the tax documents I had prepared for him in the past. I knew his massive credit card debt and his terrible spending habits. There was absolutely no logical way any reputable bank would have approved Greg and Sarah for a jumbo mortgage on a luxury property, unless they had a highly qualified secret co-signer with a flawless credit history and a pristine debt-to-income ratio to prop up their application. 2 years ago, my parents had asked me to provide my physical social security card and my official state driver's license. My father had claimed they were updating an old family life insurance policy and needed to verify my identity for the beneficiary paperwork. Because I was their trusted family accountant and because I still naively believed my parents would never actively harm me, I handed over the documents without a single suspicion. They had held onto my identification for 3 full days before returning it. I had literally handed them the exact financial tools they needed to steal my identity and commit federal mortgage fraud. I pulled my car into the designated parking spot outside my modest brick apartment building. The rain was still pouring down in thick, heavy sheets washing over the concrete. I turned off the engine and sat in the dark for a brief moment, letting the reality of the situation wash over me. My modest lifestyle, my frugal choices, my relentless dedication to my corporate job had built a perfect financial profile, and my family had hijacked that profile to buy $1 million mansion for a sister who would not even let me into her baby shower. I grabbed my purse from the passenger seat and stepped out into the rain. I did not bother running for the stairs. The cold water soaking into my ruined coat meant absolutely nothing to me now. I walked up the 3 flights of concrete stairs to my apartment, unlocked my front door and stepped inside. The quiet calm of my living room was a stark contrast to the loud, chaotic country club I had just left. There were no expensive chandeliers here. There were no wealthy socialites evaluating my worth. There was just a desk, a comfortable chair, and my professional workstation. I dropped my wet coat onto the floor by the front door and walked straight to my home office. I did not bother changing into dry clothes. I sat down at my sturdy wooden desk and booted up my primary laptop. The screen glowed to life, illuminating the dark room with a bright blue light. I opened my highly secure professional accounting software, the exact system I used to prepare the Hayes family tax returns every single spring. As the encrypted portal loaded, I felt a cold, sharp focus settle completely over my mind. They thought I was a naive pushover. They thought because I was quiet and eager to please that I was stupid. But my mother had made a critical, fatal error when she bragged about removing my name from the mortgage. She forgot that removing a name from a federal loan document requires a massive, complex paper trail. And she forgot that I am the person who built and maintained the entire digital archive of their financial history. I typed in my complex administrative password and hit enter. The database loaded, displaying a long, neatly organized list of client folders. I scrolled past my corporate accounts and clicked directly into the folder labeled Hayes Family Financials. I pulled up the comprehensive tax return documents I had painstakingly prepared for Sarah and Greg last year. I navigated straight to the real estate and property tax deduction section. My eyes scanned the digital rows of numbers and legal disclosures, looking for the specific glaring anomaly that I knew had to be hiding in the margins. I was no longer looking at the screen as a sister trying to help her family save money on their tax returns. I was looking at the screen as a forensic auditor hunting for a smoking gun. I needed to see exactly how deep the fraud went and exactly how much of my future they had stolen to pay for their fake luxury life. I sat alone in the quiet darkness of my apartment office. The only sound in the room was the steady, rhythmic clicking of my computer mouse and the heavy thud of my own heartbeat drumming wildly against my ribs. The rain continued to beat against my window pane, a constant reminder of the storm I had just been standing in outside the country club. My soaked clothes clung to my skin, making me shiver, but I refused to stand up and change. I was entirely consumed by the task in front of me. As a corporate accountant handling multi-million-dollar portfolios for a prestigious Chicago firm, I possess access to comprehensive financial databases and professional tier credit monitoring services that the average consumer never even knows exist. I did not just request a standard superficial credit check. I initiated a deep dive forensic pull of my entire personal and professional financial identity. I needed to see every single piece of paper, every active line of credit, and every open or closed account attached to my social security number for the past 10 years. While the system processed my highly secure request, I leaned back in my ergonomic desk chair and stared blankly at the white ceiling. I tried desperately to convince myself that I had simply misunderstood my mother's venomous words. I tried to tell myself that I was overreacting to a cruel passing comment meant only to hurt my feelings. But the cold, hard logic of my chosen profession refused to let me look away or make excuses for them anymore. Numbers do not lie. People lie. My family lied constantly. And my mother had specifically and intentionally mentioned mortgage paperwork. She had gloated about it. A soft chime from my computer speakers pulled my attention back to the glowing monitors. The progress bar on my screen reached 100%. A massive, highly detailed 50-page digital report generated and opened on my dual monitor setup. I grabbed my mouse and began scrolling. I scrolled right past the perfectly spotless records of my modest auto loan, which I had paid off 2 years early. I bypassed the flawless history of my zero-balance credit cards. My credit score had always hovered around a perfect 800. I guarded my financial stability with my absolute life because it was the only thing in the world I truly owned and controlled. I did not have a wealthy family safety net. I only had my own hard work. I scrolled past my clean student loan repayment history and navigated directly down to the real estate liability section. There it was. It sat right in the middle of my screen like a venomous snake preparing to strike. A massive glaring block of bold text documenting a $1.2 million jumbo mortgage originated exactly 24 months ago. My hands began to shake so violently that I had to let go of the mouse. The property address listed on the loan documents matched my sister Sarah and her husband Greg's sprawling luxury estate located in the most elite northern suburb of Chicago. The primary borrowers listed on the top line were Sarah Montgomery and Gregory Montgomery. And right below their names, legally bound to $1 million debt I did not owe, was the name of the absolute primary guarantor, Chloe Marie Hayes. The air was instantly and violently sucked completely out of my lungs. My vision blurred around the edges, and a powerful wave of nausea hit my stomach so hard, I had to grip the solid edge of my wooden desk to keep from falling out of my chair. I closed my eyes tightly, but the glowing digital numbers burned right through my eyelids. $1.2 million. I forced my eyes open and dug deeper into the digital public records. Because my firm handles massive commercial real estate auditing, I knew exactly how to access the digitized county property deeds and the officially recorded mortgage documents. I pulled the original loan origination file directly from the county clerk portal. I needed to see the actual physical paperwork. I needed to see exactly how they managed to pull off a massive federal financial crime right under my highly trained nose. Page after page of complex legal agreements and binding financial contracts loaded onto my screen. I read through the massive interest rates, the aggressive repayment schedules, and the strict default clauses. And then I finally saw it. The final signature page. There was Greg's sloppy, arrogant scroll taking up entirely too much space on the line. There was Sarah's neat looping handwriting right beside his. And sitting perfectly on the line, explicitly designated for the primary financial guarantor, was my signature. Except it was not my actual signature. It was a terrifyingly accurate, masterful forgery. I stared at the looping letters of my own stolen name. My mother, Barbara, had always possessed a strange, unsettling talent for mimicking handwriting. She used to sign my father's name on routine checks when I was a little girl to save time. She had clearly studied my signature incredibly carefully. but a forged signature alone does not secure $1 million jumbo loan. You need ironclad physical proof of identity. Then the memory hit me like a physical punch to the jaw. 2 years ago, right around the exact date this loan was originated, my parents had casually asked to borrow my physical social security card and my official state-issued driver's license. My father, Richard, had claimed they were updating an old comprehensive family life insurance policy and needed to officially verify my identity for the strict beneficiary paperwork. Because I was their trusted family accountant, and because I still naively, stupidly believed that my own parents would never actively seek to destroy me, I had handed over the highly sensitive documents without a single suspicion. They had held onto my identification for 3 full days before finally returning it, claiming the insurance broker had been delayed. My father was the one who physically handed my identification cards back to me. He had looked me right in the eyes, smiled, and thanked me for being so helpful. The betrayal stung with a fresh, vicious intensity. He knew exactly what they were doing with my identity, and he smiled right at me. I had literally handed them the exact financial tools they needed to steal my identity and commit federal mortgage fraud. They had likely used an online remote notary service, a common practice during the pandemic protocols, to entirely bypass having me physically present in a room with a loan officer. They presented my stolen credentials, forged my name on camera, and seamlessly locked me into a 30-year financial prison. They had orchestrated a highly coordinated, calculated theft of my financial identity. Sarah and Greg desperately wanted a massive house to impress their snobby high society friends. But Greg's credit profile was absolute garbage. He lived completely on maxed-out high-interest credit cards to fund his expensive golf club memberships, his custom-tailored suits, and his leased luxury cars. No reputable lending institution in the entire country would have ever handed a man like Greg $1 million based on his actual verifiable income. So they used me. They used the quiet, boring accountant's sister who lived frugally in a modest apartment and saved every single penny she earned. They stole my pristine, immaculate credit history to buy a luxury house that I was explicitly banned from entering. The sheer unmatched audacity of the crime was staggering, but the horror did not stop there. I went back to my comprehensive credit report and meticulously checked the current payment status of the massive jumbo loan. If they were paying the mortgage on time every month, it would simply be a massive, hidden, unapproved liability hanging over my head. But Greg's business was a boutique financial consulting firm that I knew from doing his taxes for years, consisted mostly of expensive networking lunches and very few actual paying clients. I dragged my mouse down to look at the monthly payment history grid. I saw green check marks for the first 18 months. They had managed to keep up the expensive charade for a year and a half. Then I saw a bright yellow warning sign indicating a missed payment 90 days ago. Another yellow warning sign appeared for 60 days ago. And finally, a bright glaring red warning sign indicating a severely missed payment for 30 days ago. I read the official account status typed in harsh capital letters. 90 days severely delinquent. Pre-foreclosure proceedings initiated. My heart slammed against my chest like a trapped bird trying to break free. 90 days delinquent. They were not just struggling to make ends meet. They were actively defaulting on the massive loan. The carefully constructed illusion of Greg's massive wealth was completely and totally collapsing. They had completely run out of money to keep up the fake high society charade. They had maxed out Sarah's personal credit cards on imported nursery furniture for a luxury baby shower that I had just paid for because they literally did not have a single dollar left to their names. Greg's so-called wildly successful consulting business was bleeding out rapidly. I opened another secure window and pulled up the detailed tax returns I had prepared for him last April. I had sat at my parents' kitchen table and explicitly warned him then that his debt-to-income ratio was completely unsustainable and highly dangerous. He had laughed directly in my face. He told me that boring corporate accountants simply do not understand the aggressive mindset of true wealthy entrepreneurs. He told me I was too small-minded and too cowardly to understand how the rich leverage massive debt to build grand empires. He was not leveraging debt, he was drowning in it, and now his sinking ship was pulling me down into the deep, dark water right along with him. The full catastrophic reality of what my own family had deliberately done to me crashed down on my shoulders like an avalanche of concrete. If a $1.2 million jumbo mortgage went into federal foreclosure with my name permanently listed as the primary financial guarantor, my perfectly curated, responsible life would be instantly and permanently destroyed. My pristine credit score would plummet from 800 down to the low 500s overnight. As a licensed certified public accountant, maintaining an absolutely clean, highly ethical financial record is not just a personal lifestyle preference. It is a strict, mandatory professional requirement. My firm conducts rigorous background checks on all senior staff every single year. If I had a massive residential foreclosure and a highly potential federal bankruptcy suddenly attached to my social security number, my firm would be legally forced to terminate my employment immediately. The state ethics board would launch an investigation. I would very likely lose my professional license entirely. I would lose my hard-earned career. I would be completely ruined. They knew exactly what they were doing. My mother knew my career depended on my absolute financial integrity. They simply did not care. My mother, my father, and my sister had looked at my entire future, my safety, my stability, and my entire livelihood, and they collectively decided it was a perfectly acceptable sacrifice, just so Sarah could have imported marble countertops and a custom luxury nursery. I sat completely alone in the silent chill of my home office, staring at the bright red delinquent notice flashing on my monitor. I felt a cold, sharp tear slide slowly down my cheek, but I quickly, aggressively wiped it away with the back of my hand. The profound, deep-rooted sadness, the pathetic, lingering childhood hope that my family would one day genuinely love and accept me, evaporated completely into the chilled air of my apartment. It was gone forever. In its place, a massive, suffocating, powerful rage began to build deep within my core. It was not a fiery, loud, screaming anger. It was an absolute, freezing, silent, calculating fury. It was the exact kind of anger that moves mountains and destroys corrupt empires. I slowly closed the digital mortgage files and locked down my secure portal. I did not scream into the empty room. I did not throw my phone across the desk. I simply sat perfectly still in the glow of the monitors and let the cold, highly analytical logic of my profession take over my entire brain. They thought they could use my financial ghost to fraudulently prop up their fake luxury life. They thought I was too weak, too quiet, and too desperate for their basic approval to ever fight back against them. They thought I would just quietly absorb the destruction of my life to protect their precious social reputation. They were absolutely, completely wrong. I did not call the police that night. I did not pick up my phone and scream at my mother. I did not send a furious text message to my sister demanding to know how they could possibly steal my identity to buy a luxury mansion. The old version of me would have absolutely done that. The desperate daughter who just wanted to be loved would have called them sobbing, begging for an explanation, and pleading with them to take my name off the fraudulent loan. But as a forensic corporate accountant, I knew that confronting a financial criminal is the absolute worst mistake you can possibly make. Confrontation is a warning bell. If I tipped my hand and let them know I had discovered the forged mortgage documents, they would immediately go into self-preservation mode. They would start moving whatever little cash they had left into hidden accounts. They would hire defense attorneys to muddy the waters. They might even try to claim that I had given them verbal permission to use my social security number and that I was simply lying now out of petty jealousy because I had been excluded from a luxury country club baby shower. I knew exactly how my mother operated. She would spin the narrative to make me look like the bitter, unhinged sister who was trying to ruin Sarah's perfect life. I needed to completely remove my emotions from the equation. I had to treat my own family like a corrupt corporate entity that I was preparing to dismantle. The very next morning, I called in sick to my firm. I put on my sharpest professional suit, gathered the extensive digital portfolio of evidence I had compiled overnight, and drove straight to the downtown commercial district of Chicago. I did not need a standard family lawyer. I needed a shark. I needed someone who specialized in high-stakes white-collar crime and complex financial litigation. I walked into the sleek high-rise office of attorney Robert Sterling. Robert Sterling was a terrifyingly calm, meticulously organized man who had spent 30 years tearing apart corrupt executives and fraudulent corporations. When I sat down in his leather chair and laid out the printed copies of the forged jumbo mortgage, the stolen tax documents, and the timeline of my mother's financial manipulation. He did not offer me empty sympathy. He simply put on his reading glasses, reviewed the paperwork for 20 solid minutes in absolute silence, and then looked up at me with cold, calculating eyes. He told me my family had committed multiple counts of severe federal crimes, including wire fraud, identity theft, and bank fraud. Because the mortgage was heavily backed by a federal lending institution, the consequences were astronomical. But he also gave me the hardest piece of advice I had ever received. He leaned across his massive oak desk and told me to play the long game. He said, if we simply went to the local police right now, it would be a messy, chaotic. He said, she said family dispute that could drag on for years in civil court. He told me the absolute best strategy was to stay completely silent and let them continue to hang themselves with their own rope. They were already 90 days delinquent on the $1 million loan. Greg's fake consulting business was bleeding out. If we let the bank initiate the aggressive foreclosure process, the federal authorities would naturally begin to audit the original loan documents. We would simply be waiting in the shadows to hand the federal investigators the silver bullet on a silver platter. I had to maintain absolute radio silence. I had to keep their phone numbers completely blocked. I had to let them genuinely believe that I was just throwing a massive childish temper tantrum over being uninvited to a baby shower. For the next 2 years, I lived a completely double life. To the outside world, I was just a dedicated corporate accountant, working hard and minding my own business. But behind closed doors, I was working silently with Attorney Sterling, the Internal Revenue Service, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. It was an agonizing, exhausting process. I had to sit through long, grueling interviews with federal agents in sterile government buildings, handing over decades of my parents' financial records and formally testifying that my signature had been forged. I had to watch my own credit score take a temporary massive hit as the fraudulent mortgage officially went into severe default status. Attorney Sterling had to file complex legal injunctions behind the scenes to legally shield my professional accounting license from the fallout, while the federal investigation quietly built an airtight, ironclad case against my parents and my brother-in-law. And the entire time, my mother kept trying to reach out to me, completely oblivious to the federal trap that was slowly closing around her throat. Every few months, a new voicemail from a blocked number would slip through to my phone. My mother would leave messages oscillating wildly between aggressive anger and fake tearful apologies. She would tell me I was tearing the family apart over $3,500 and a stupid baby shower. She would say Sarah was crying because her baby was growing up without an aunt. She would demand that I unblock them and act like a mature adult. They literally thought I was ignoring them because of the rain and the rejected gift. They had absolutely no idea that I was sitting in federal field offices discussing their impending prison sentences. I never answered a single call. I never replied to a single email. I completely vanished from their world. It was during this dark, isolating period of my life that I met David. David was brought into my accounting firm as a senior independent data analyst to help transition our massive client databases into a new, highly secure software system. We ended up working closely together on a grueling 3-month project. He was brilliant, incredibly kind, and refreshingly genuine. Unlike Greg, who constantly wore flashy designer labels and bragged loudly about his fake wealth, David was quiet, observant, and completely unassuming. He wore simple, well-made sweaters, drove an incredibly practical, reliable car, and brought me hot coffee during our long late-night shifts. We started talking during our short breaks in the office kitchen, and I quickly realized that David truly saw me. He did not see a walking wallet or a convenient family fixer. He saw a smart, capable woman who was carrying an incredibly heavy burden. About 6 months into our relationship, things started getting very serious. I knew I could not marry him without telling him the absolute truth about the chaotic, dangerous legal situation I was navigating behind the scenes. One quiet Sunday evening, sitting on the couch in my modest apartment, I finally broke down and told David everything. I told him about the financial abuse, the baby shower in the rain, the forged mortgage, and the active federal investigation. I told him my credit was temporarily ruined and that I was legally fighting my own parents to save my future. I fully expected him to run in the exact opposite direction. Any normal person would want to avoid that level of intense toxic family drama. Instead, David simply reached out, pulled me into a tight, warm embrace, and told me I was the strongest person he had ever met. He told me he was not going anywhere. But David had a massive secret of his own, a secret that would eventually make the ultimate climax of my story feel like absolute poetic justice. As we grew closer and began discussing our future together, David finally sat me down to explain his own family background. He told me he lived simply because he wanted to be valued for his skills and his character, not his bank account. He revealed that his last name was attached to one of the oldest, most prominent wealth management and real estate portfolios in the entire Midwest. David came from actual generational old money. His family did not lease flashy sports cars to impress strangers at local country clubs. His family actually owned the country clubs. His parents sat on the executive boards of major philanthropic foundations and historic museums. They possessed the exact kind of quiet, untouchable high society wealth that my brother-in-law Greg had spent his entire pathetic life desperately trying to mimic. When I finally met David's parents, they welcomed me with absolute open arms. They did not care that I came from a working-class background. They only cared that I was a hardworking, honest woman who made their son incredibly happy. Over the next 2 years, as the federal fraud case against my family silently reached its boiling point, my own personal life blossomed into something incredibly beautiful. David proposed to me on a quiet, gorgeous beach in Michigan. We began planning a breathtaking, elegant private estate wedding completely funded by our own combined savings. I was stepping into a bright, secure future filled with unconditional love and genuine respect. Meanwhile, my biological family was spiraling down into an absolute nightmare of their own making. Through attorney Sterling, I received quiet, regular updates on their impending doom. Greg and Sarah's million-dollar mansion had officially gone into severe foreclosure. The bank had initiated the legal process to seize the property. Greg's fake consulting business had completely collapsed, and he was drowning in massive aggressive lawsuits from his angry, unpaid creditors. My parents had drained the very last of their retirement funds, trying to hire cheap lawyers to stall the aggressive banking collection agencies. They were desperate, completely broke, and entirely out of options. And yet they still managed to maintain their fake wealthy facade to the outside world, proudly pretending everything was absolutely fine. My biological family had absolutely no idea that I was engaged. They had no idea I was planning a wedding. And they certainly had no idea that I was marrying into the exact elite billionaire social circle that my mother and Greg worshipped like a religion. I wanted to keep it that way. I wanted to get married in absolute peace, surrounded only by the people who truly loved me. I did not send them an invitation. I did not send them an announcement. I kept my social media profiles completely locked down and heavily restricted. I thought I had perfectly insulated myself from their toxic reach. I thought I had built an impenetrable wall between my beautiful new life and the dark federal trap that was waiting to swallow them whole. But narcissists possess an unnatural, terrifying ability to sniff out an opportunity to elevate their own social status. 3 months before my wedding day, the invisible wall I had built completely shattered. Someone from my old high school who vaguely knew my sister had managed to figure out that I was engaged to David. That person mentioned David's incredibly prominent last name to Sarah. And just like that, the absolute silence was aggressively broken. My mother suddenly realized that the daughter she had thrown out into the freezing rain was about to marry into one of the most powerful, wealthy families in the entire state. The daughter she called a gloomy, boring accountant was about to have access to the exact high society network she had spent her entire miserable life desperately trying to infiltrate. The stage was completely set for a final devastating collision. I had played the long silent game for 2 agonizing years. I had gathered the forged documents. I had worked with the federal agents. I had secured my own future. And now my family was marching blindly straight toward the edge of a massive cliff, entirely convinced they were about to walk into a luxury palace. For 2 completely peaceful years, my life had been a quiet sanctuary of healing and rebuilding. David and I were 3 months away from our wedding day. We had chosen a breathtaking private estate sitting on 40 acres of pristine woodland just outside the city. We wanted an intimate, elegant ceremony surrounded only by the people who truly knew us and genuinely loved us. I was no longer the shivering, broken girl standing in the freezing rain outside a country club. I was a confident woman building a beautiful, secure future with a man who cherished me. The federal fraud case against my biological family was still silently moving forward in the background, meticulously managed by Attorney Sterling and the federal investigators. As far as my parents and my sister Sarah knew, I had simply vanished from the face of the earth. I had blocked their numbers, locked down my social media profiles, and completely severed all ties. I thought I had perfectly insulated myself from their toxic reach. I thought I was safe. But narcissists possess an unnatural, terrifying ability to sniff out an opportunity to elevate their own social status. They can feel a shift in the wind when wealth and power are involved. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was sitting in my home office reviewing a spreadsheet for a corporate client when my cell phone vibrated across my wooden desk. The caller identification displayed a completely unknown local number. Normally, I would let an unknown number go straight to voicemail, but I had recently been playing phone tag with several different wedding vendors. Our caterer had been calling from various staff phones to confirm menu details, so I casually reached over and answered the call. I said hello and gave my name, expecting to hear the cheerful voice of our event coordinator. Instead, the voice that came through the speaker caused the blood to instantly freeze in my veins. "Chloe, darling, it has been far too long." It was my mother, Barbara. My lungs completely stopped working. I sat frozen in my ergonomic office chair, gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. For a split second, my brain tried to convince me that this was a cruel prank, but there was absolutely no mistaking that voice. It was the exact same voice that had aggressively screamed at me to go home in the rain. It was the exact same voice that had called me a walking wallet. But right now, she did not sound angry or disgusted. She sounded sickeningly sweet. She sounded like a woman calling her beloved best friend after a long, relaxing vacation. The sheer terrifying audacity of her tone left me completely speechless. I could not form a single word. My mother did not even wait for me to respond. She immediately launched into a breathless, excited monologue, acting as if the last 2 years of absolute silence and profound betrayal had simply never happened. Her selective amnesia was a psychological masterpiece. She happily chirped that she had run into Mrs. Kensington at the luxury floral boutique downtown. Mrs. Kensington was a wealthy socialite my mother had desperately been trying to impress for over a decade. Apparently, Mrs. Kensington was a close personal friend of David's mother, and she had gleefully mentioned the upcoming wedding between David and a lovely accountant named Chloe. My mother laughed a bright, bubbly, completely fake laugh through the phone. She told me she simply could not believe her ears when she heard the news. She said she was so incredibly proud of me for finally landing a man from such an important, prominent family. The way she emphasized the word important made my stomach churn with violent nausea. She was not calling because she missed her daughter. She was not calling to apologize for ruining my credit score or secretly forcing $1 million fraudulent mortgage onto my social security number. She was calling because I had accidentally secured the ultimate golden ticket into the exact billionaire social circle she worshipped like a religion. Before I could even process the absolute insanity of her words, she shifted gears and instantly took total control of the conversation, exactly like she had done my entire life. She told me she had already driven past the private estate we had booked for the ceremony, and she thoroughly approved of the venue. Then she began rattling off a massive list of aggressive demands disguised as helpful motherly advice. First, she announced that she and my father would obviously be co-hosting the wedding alongside David's parents. She insisted that their names needed to be printed at the very top of the formal invitations in bold, elegant font, so all of Greg's business partners would know our family was officially merging with old money. She told me she had already started looking at imported silk gowns for herself because she needed to look absolutely flawless when she stood next to David's mother in the receiving line. Then she dropped the next bomb. She cheerfully informed me that Sarah would naturally be my matron of honor. She completely ignored the undeniable fact that Sarah had literally stolen my financial identity and ruined my professional credit to buy a luxury mansion. She brushed past our total estrangement like it was just a silly minor disagreement over borrowed clothes. She said Sarah was already looking at custom designer bridesmaid dresses and that I needed to wire her $3,000 by Friday to cover the fitting and the imported fabric. She actually said the words, wire her $3,000 with zero hesitation. I sat there, listening to the sound of her voice echoing in my quiet home office. The absolute delusion was staggering. She was demanding that I pay for the woman who committed federal wire fraud against me to stand next to me at the altar. But my mother was still not finished. She took a quick breath and moved on to her final, most important demand. She told me she was currently compiling a mandatory guest list that she would be emailing to me by the end of the day. She said she had 50 specific names of elite country club friends, high society neighbors, and prominent local politicians that simply had to receive priority invitations. She explained that she had spent years carefully cultivating these vital social relationships, and that my wedding was the absolute perfect opportunity for our family to finally cement our status at the very top of the social ladder. She lowered her voice into a conspiratorial whisper, telling me that Greg's consulting business was going through a tiny rough patch, and that mingling with David's wealthy relatives at our reception would give Greg the perfect chance to secure some massive new investment capital. She was literally planning to use my sacred wedding day as a desperate networking event to bail out her fraudulent son-in-law. She finished her unhinged monologue by telling me she would come by my apartment tomorrow morning so we could finalize the floral arrangements and review the seating chart. She said she loved me and that she was just so thrilled we were finally acting like a real family again. I did not argue with her. I did not scream. I did not demand to know how she could possibly sleep at night, knowing she had forged my signature on $1 million federal loan. I knew exactly what Attorney Sterling had told me. Confrontation is a warning bell. I needed to maintain the strict boundary and let her continue walking blindly toward the federal trap. I took a slow, deep breath, steadying my racing heart. I simply pulled the phone away from my ear and pressed the red button to end the call. The silence in my office rushed back in replacing the toxic, suffocating sound of her voice. My hands were no longer shaking. The frightened, rejected 13-year-old girl who used to cry on the porch was completely gone. The anxious 27-year-old accountant shivering in the rain was gone too. I was a strong, independent woman who knew exactly what her boundaries were and exactly how to enforce them. I opened my text messaging app. I typed in the unknown number she had just called me from. I did not write a long emotional paragraph explaining how much she had hurt me. I did not try to make her understand the depth of her betrayal because narcissists are fundamentally incapable of understanding pain they cause to others. They only understand access and denial. I decided to use the exact weapon she had used against me 2 years ago outside the country club. I used her own venomous words. I typed the message with slow, deliberate precision. I was told over and over that I was not welcome at family events. You made it perfectly clear that high society events are for real family only. You and Sarah are not invited to my wedding. Do not contact me again. I hit send. Then I immediately blocked the new number. I set my phone face down on the desk and went back to reviewing the corporate spreadsheet on my monitor. I knew exactly what was going to happen next. By rejecting her demand to co-host the wedding, I had just denied her access to the billionaire social circle she craved more than oxygen. I had publicly rejected her in a way that she could not easily explain away to her snobby country club friends. She had likely already bragged to Mrs. Kensington that she was helping plan the wedding of the century. Now she was going to have to explain why the mother of the bride was not on the guest list. It took exactly 45 minutes for the retaliation to begin. Because I had blocked her new number, she could not call or text me directly. But my mother was a woman obsessed with having the final word. She bypassed the phone carrier block by calling my secure office voicemail system from a hidden private line. I saw the red notification light blinking on my desk phone. I reached over and pressed the speaker button, letting the message play out loud in the empty room. The sickeningly sweet, motherly tone she had used on the phone an hour ago was completely gone. The mask had violently slipped off, revealing the raw, ugly, desperate rage underneath. Her voice was shaking with an absolute terrifying fury. "Chloe, Marie Hayes, you listen to me right now." She screamed into the receiver, her voice distorting the audio. "You do not get to speak to your mother this way. You do not get to shut us out of a major social event after everything we have done for you. You think because you manipulated some rich boy into marrying you that you are suddenly better than us. You are nothing. You are a selfish, ungrateful little brat who cares about nobody but herself." I leaned back in my chair and listened to her unravel. It was fascinating, in a morbid, clinical way, to hear her project all of her own sins directly onto me. She took a ragged, aggressive breath, and her tone shifted from pure rage to a dark, calculated threat. "You think you can just ban us from this wedding and live happily ever after? You think I am going to let you humiliate this family in front of the entire city? You are dead wrong, Chloe. If you do not unblock my number and send me those 50 invitations by tomorrow morning, I am going to personally drive to that private estate on your wedding day. Sarah and Greg and your father are coming with me. We are going to walk right through those front doors, and we are going to introduce ourselves to every single one of David's wealthy relatives." She laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that sent a brief chill down my spine. "I am going to pull David's mother aside, and I am going to tell her exactly what kind of psychotic, unstable girl her son is marrying. I am going to expose you. I will tell them how you abandoned your pregnant sister when she needed you most. I will tell them you are a pathological liar who abuses her own family over petty jealousy. I will make sure David's family knows that bringing you into their circle will completely destroy their flawless public reputation. They care about their social standing, Chloe. When they hear the truth about what a terrible daughter you are, they will force him to cancel the wedding immediately." Her voice dropped to a low, venomous hiss. "You either give us the respect and the access we deserve, or I will personally make sure your precious new life is burned completely to the ground. You have until tomorrow morning to fix this." The voicemail ended with a loud, violent click. I sat in my office, staring at the blinking red light on the telephone base. She honestly believed she held all the cards. She honestly believed that the threat of public social humiliation would terrify me into submission, just like it had always terrified her. She thought I was still the fragile girl, desperately trying to avoid making a scene. She did not know that David and I had already listened to the audio recordings of her planning to steal my money at the country club. She did not know that David's prominent, wealthy family already knew every single detail about the forged jumbo mortgage and the active federal investigation. They did not view me as a liability. They viewed my biological family as a dangerous criminal enterprise that needed to be permanently neutralized. I did not feel fear as I listened to her unhinged threats. I felt a profound, cold clarity. My mother had just explicitly promised to bring Richard, Sarah, and Greg directly to the private estate on the day of my wedding. She had promised to march them all right through the front doors and directly into the center of the reception hall. She thought she was designing my ultimate public destruction. She had absolutely no idea that she was willingly, aggressively walking her entire family right into the absolute center of a federal trap. David was sitting right next to me on the plush fabric of our living room sofa when the chilling voicemail finally ended. The heavy, suffocating silence in our apartment was thick enough to cut with a knife. We had just listened to my mother, Barbara, completely unravel through the speaker of my phone. Her voice had been shaking with terrifying, aggressive fury as she promised to drive to our private wedding estate, march through the front doors, and completely destroy my character in front of David's wealthy, prominent family. She had threatened to expose me as a pathological liar and a terrible daughter if I did not immediately surrender and grant her full access to the billionaire social circle she so desperately craved. I sat frozen, staring blankly at the dark screen of my phone. A cold shiver ran down my spine. For my entire life, that exact tone of voice had paralyzed me with fear. Growing up, the constant threat of public humiliation and social exclusion was the primary weapon my mother used to keep me completely submissive. She knew exactly how to make me feel small and worthless. I expected David to panic. I fully expected him to be incredibly anxious about his family's flawless public reputation being dragged through the mud by my toxic, unhinged relatives. Any normal man would have been horrified at the prospect of his wedding day turning into a chaotic, screaming tabloid spectacle. Instead, David simply let out a slow, calm breath. He reached over, took my trembling hand in his, and looked at me with a quiet, steady, kind of unconditional love that I had never experienced growing up in my biological family. He did not ask me to compromise. He did not ask me to surrender to her demands to keep the peace. He simply asked me what I wanted to do next. I looked into his eyes, felt the solid, reassuring warmth of his hand holding mine, and I told him I wanted to call attorney Robert Sterling. Early the very next morning, David and I sat around the massive polished mahogany conference table in Attorney Sterling's downtown Chicago high-rise office. The sky outside the floor-to-ceiling windows was gray and overcast, matching the severe gravity of our meeting. I placed my phone in the center of the table, turned the volume all the way up, and played my mother's venomous voicemail on speaker. The incredibly harsh sound of her voice echoed sharply off the pristine glass walls of the office. I watched Attorney Sterling's face very closely as he listened to Barbara explicitly threaten to crash my wedding with Richard, Sarah, and Greg in tow. When the audio recording finally clicked off, I braced myself for a highly defensive legal strategy. I fully expected Sterling to suggest we immediately file an emergency restraining order against my entire biological family. I thought we would need to hire a dozen armed private security guards to barricade the heavy iron gates of the wedding estate. I was absolutely terrified that the most beautiful, important day of my life was going to be completely ruined by a violent physical altercation in the parking lot. But Robert Sterling did not look worried in the slightest. He slowly looked down at his pristine yellow legal notepad, capped his expensive silver pen, and smiled. It was a cold, highly calculated, extremely sharp smile. It was the smile of a brilliant financial litigator who had just been handed the exact missing puzzle piece he needed to close a massive federal fraud case. He looked at David, then looked directly at me, and spoke in a perfectly calm, measured, authoritative tone. He said we were not going to hire extra security to keep them out. He said we were not going to file an emergency restraining order. He told me that we were going to let them come. I stared at him in complete and total shock. I asked him why on earth we would ever willingly allow these highly toxic, manipulative people to walk into my wedding and ruin everything we had worked so hard to build. Sterling leaned forward, resting his elbows on the polished mahogany wood, and explained the brilliant, devastating reality of our current legal situation. For the past 2 years, we had been quietly, relentlessly building a massive federal fraud and identity theft case alongside the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Internal Revenue Service. My parents and my brother-in-law Greg had stolen my social security number and forged my signature to illegally secure a $1.2 million jumbo mortgage for a luxury mansion. Right now, they were exactly 90 days delinquent on that massive loan. Greg's fake consulting business was collapsing, and the entire fraudulent house of cards was rapidly crumbling to the ground. The federal agents had successfully compiled all the necessary financial evidence, but they were facing a significant logistical hurdle. They needed to officially serve the massive federal indictments to Barbara, Richard, Sarah, and Greg simultaneously. Finding all 4 of them in one single location had proven incredibly difficult, especially because Greg was actively dodging process servers and hiding from his angry, unpaid commercial creditors. Sterling explained that my mother, in her desperate blind narcissism, had just handed the federal authorities the ultimate tactical advantage. She was completely, voluntarily going to wrangle all the key suspects, dress them up in their absolute finest formal clothes, and march them directly into a confined, highly secure and easily accessible location. "Let them come," Sterling said, his voice dropping to a serious low register. "In fact, we need them all in one single room. It is the absolute perfect opportunity. Your mother wants a grand, wealthy audience to witness your supposed public humiliation. We are going to give her that exact audience so they can witness her actual criminal downfall." David squeezed my hand tightly under the heavy wooden table. He completely and totally agreed with the strategy. He looked at Sterling and confirmed that his parents were already fully aware of the ongoing federal investigation. David's family did not view me as a liability. They viewed my biological family as a dangerous criminal enterprise that needed to be permanently and publicly neutralized. We finalized the trap right there in the office. My wedding day would proceed exactly as beautifully planned. But when my biological family arrived to execute their cruel narcissistic threat, they would be walking entirely blindly into an inescapable legal ambush. The morning of my wedding day arrived with breathtaking clarity. The sky over the private estate was a brilliant, flawless, vibrant blue, completely devoid of the dark, heavy storm clouds that had haunted my past. The venue was a sprawling, historic stone mansion set on 40 pristine acres of lush green woodland, just 45 minutes outside the city limits. It featured rolling, manicured gardens, elegant stone fountains, and towering ancient oak trees. It was the exact kind of exclusive, ultra-wealthy environment that my mother and Greg spent their entire miserable lives desperately trying to gain access to. I sat in the bright, elegant bridal suite surrounded by my closest friends and David's wonderful, deeply supportive sisters. They helped me step into my custom silk wedding gown. The heavy, luxurious fabric was smooth and completely flawless. It was a stark, incredibly emotional contrast to the cheap, heavily discounted clothing I had been forced to wear my entire childhood, while Sarah always received the brand new designer labels. For the very first time in my 29 years of life, I looked in the full-length mirror and saw a woman who was truly deeply valued. I did not look like a walking wallet. I did not look like the boring, gloomy accountant my mother had viciously mocked in the freezing rain. I looked like a beautiful bride who was unconditionally loved and fiercely protected. Despite the overwhelming joy of the morning, a heavy, quiet tension hummed constantly beneath the surface of my skin. My heart pounded a relentless, rapid rhythm against my ribs. Every single time I heard a heavy wooden door close in the hallway outside the suite, I flinched. Every time a vendor spoke loudly in the stone courtyard below my window, my breath caught sharply in my throat. I knew the storm was coming. I knew with absolute certainty that my mother was currently putting on her best, most expensive fake jewelry, practicing her sweet high society smile in the mirror, and preparing to launch a full-scale public assault on my happiness. The ceremony took place in the spectacular sunken garden located directly behind the main stone estate. A brilliant professional string quartet played a soft, sweeping classical melody as I walked slowly down the long aisle lined with white flower petals. I walked completely alone, holding my head incredibly high. I did not need Richard to give me away. He had given me away the exact moment he selfishly signed those forged mortgage documents and traded my entire financial future for a fake luxury lifestyle. When I finally reached the altar and took David's warm, steady hands, the entire chaotic world seemed to blur completely into the background. His dark eyes were calm and intensely reassuring. We exchanged our personal vows under a massive, beautiful arch woven entirely of fresh white roses and lush emerald greenery. The officiant spoke eloquently about building a solid foundation of honesty and about fiercely protecting the one you love from the harshness of the outside world. Every single word resonated deeply and powerfully within my soul. When David finally kissed me, the 200 elegant guests erupted into a joyful, thunderous applause. The moment was absolutely perfect. It was the exact opposite of the screaming, toxic family dynamic I had survived for so long. But as we transitioned away from the peaceful sunlit garden ceremony and moved toward the grand, opulent indoor reception hall, the psychological ticking clock in my head grew louder and more insistent. The main reception space was an absolute masterclass in quiet generational wealth. Massive, glowing crystal chandeliers hung from the soaring vaulted ceilings, casting a warm, rich golden light over the beautifully set tables. The floral centerpieces were towering, extravagant arrangements of pure white orchids and fresh hydrangeas. Professional waiters in crisp black tuxedos circulated seamlessly through the massive room, carrying polished silver trays of expensive champagne and delicate, intricate hors d'oeuvres. David's family and their incredibly prominent, wealthy business partners mingled effortlessly, filling the room with the sophisticated, joyful hum of high society conversation. I took my seat next to David at the long, beautifully decorated center table. My eyes instinctively immediately scanned the room and locked onto the massive, heavy wooden double doors at the main entrance of the hall. I took a slow sip of my ice water, trying desperately to force my racing heart to slow its frantic, anxious rhythm. I knew that somewhere out there, on this massive property, my biological family was aggressively marching toward those exact doors. They were coming to burn my entire world to the ground. I glanced quickly over to a small, unassuming table tucked neatly into the shadowed back corner of the grand room. Attorney Robert Sterling was sitting there perfectly calm, sipping a glass of iced club soda. Sitting directly beside him were two large, broad-shouldered men wearing incredibly sharp, dark, serious suits. They were not smiling. They were not talking to the other guests. They were federal agents, fully briefed, fully prepared, and waiting with absolute patience for their targets to finally arrive. The live jazz band, positioned on the far stage, began to play a lively, upbeat tune, signaling the official start of the elegant dinner service. The guests were happily finding their assigned seats and laughing softly with one another. I felt David gently place his warm hand over my own, his thumb tracing a slow, soothing circle over my trembling knuckles. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw the head of the private estate security team walk swiftly and purposefully through the side entrance. He was a tall, highly imposing man with a discreet coiled earpiece tucked neatly behind his collar. He moved with absolute urgent precision, weaving efficiently through the crowded luxury tables directly toward where David and I were seated. The air in my lungs completely vanished. The moment had officially arrived. The security chief leaned down very close to my ear to ensure absolutely none of the surrounding wealthy guests could hear him over the lively jazz music. His voice was a low, serious, completely professional rumble. He respectfully called me ma'am and whispered that we had a highly escalating situation out at the front security gate. He explained that a vehicle was aggressively demanding immediate entry onto the private grounds. He said the occupants were becoming highly volatile and belligerent with the gate staff. They were loudly claiming that they were my immediate biological family and stating aggressively that they had an absolute legal right to be present at this event. I looked at the security chief, keeping my face perfectly still and expressionless. I asked him to tell me their exact names. He pulled a small black leather notepad from his inside jacket pocket and read the names aloud to me. He said they gave the names Barbara Hayes, Richard Hayes, and Sarah Hayes. He added that there was a fourth individual who was doing the vast majority of the loud, arrogant yelling, a man who identified himself as Mr. Greg Montgomery. Hearing their specific names spoken aloud in this beautiful, safe, luxurious space felt like a sudden violent drop in atmospheric pressure. They had actually done it. My mother had followed through on her deranged, narcissistic threat with absolute terrifying precision. She had gathered my passive father, my spoiled sister, and the arrogant man who forged my signature and drove them all the way out to this remote private estate to publicly ruin my life. They were sitting out at the front gate right at this very second, completely convinced that their sheer audacity would force me into total humiliating submission. They truly thought I would be so terrified of a public high society scene that I would desperately order the guards to let them in and cater to their every single whim. The security chief kept his sharp eyes locked directly on mine, waiting patiently for his final orders. He informed me that he currently had 5 additional highly trained guards on immediate standby at the perimeter. He offered to personally and forcefully escort them off the property right now or instantly call the local police department to have them officially removed and arrested for criminal trespassing. The old, fragile version of Chloe would have absolutely panicked. She would have quickly begged the guards to send them away to avoid a humiliating scene. She would have spent the rest of her beautiful wedding night hiding crying in the bathroom, terrified that her mother would somehow find a way to punish her for the rejection. But I was no longer that deeply broken girl. I was a fierce professional accountant who had spent 2 grueling years meticulously orchestrating a massive federal trap, and the criminal targets had just voluntarily knocked enthusiastically on the front door. I took a very slow, deep, highly calculated breath. I looked directly at David. He gave me a single, firm, intense nod of absolute, unwavering support. I turned my attention back to the waiting security chief. I told him in a clear, calm, icy voice that I did not want them removed from the property. The security chief looked mildly surprised by my answer, but he maintained his strict professional composure. He asked me exactly how I wanted his team to proceed with the hostile individuals. I looked past him, my eyes locking directly onto the massive wooden double doors at the front of the reception room. I pictured my mother standing on the other side wearing a formal dress she could not actually afford, fully prepared to march in and destroy my character to anyone who would listen. I pictured Sarah and Greg actively drowning in massive federal debt, arrogantly expecting to network their way out of their failing fraudulent reality. They desperately wanted access to my luxurious world. I was going to give it to them. I turned my focus back to the security chief and delivered the final definitive instruction. I told him to open the heavy front gates and let them all inside. I instructed him not to argue with them and not to ask them for their official invitations. I told him to treat them with the absolute utmost polite professional respect. I commanded that when they finally entered the main building, his team was to personally escort Barbara, Richard, Sarah, and Greg directly into this grand reception hall. I raised my hand and pointed to a specific large round table located right near the exact middle of the beautiful room. It was perfectly positioned for absolute maximum visibility. It was completely surrounded by David's wealthiest, most influential, and socially powerful family members. It was the exact kind of premium central seating my mother would blindly believe she inherently deserved. I looked at the security chief and told him to escort them directly to table 14. The massive, heavy wooden double doors at the front of the grand reception hall swung open with a slow, dramatic creak that seemed to cut right through the soft melodies of the live jazz band. I sat perfectly still beside David at our center table, watching the entrance with an absolutely clear mind. For my entire life, the sudden appearance of my biological family had always signaled the immediate beginning of my own personal misery. But not tonight. Tonight, their arrival signaled the final brilliant execution of a 2-year plan. My mother, Barbara, walked into the luxurious ballroom first. She did not just enter the room. She swaggered into the space like a conquering queen returning to claim her rightful throne. She was wearing a stunning, incredibly expensive emerald green designer evening gown that draped flawlessly across her figure. A thick string of heavy, sparkling diamonds rested against her collarbone, catching the warm golden light of the crystal chandeliers hanging high above us. Right behind her came my father, Richard, looking extremely uncomfortable, but puffed up with false pride in a tailored charcoal suit that clearly cost more than his entire monthly pension. My sister Sarah followed closely behind them, wearing a custom-fitted pale blush silk dress that swept dramatically across the polished hardwood floor. She was clinging tightly to the arm of her husband Greg. Greg was wearing a pristine midnight blue bespoke tuxedo with a flashy gold watch gleaming conspicuously on his left wrist. They looked like the absolute picture of a wealthy, powerful, high society family. They looked incredibly rich. They looked completely untouchable. But I was a corporate forensic accountant, and I knew exactly what I was really looking at. I was looking at stolen money. Every single diamond around my mother's neck, every inch of custom silk on my sister's body, and every polished thread of Greg's tuxedo was entirely funded by the massive fraudulent jumbo mortgage they had secretly secured using my stolen social security number. They were literally dripping in the exact stolen wealth that was currently 90 days severely delinquent and careening aggressively toward a federal foreclosure. They had drained everything they could possibly steal from my identity just to wear those clothes tonight. The chief of security stepped back politely, allowing them full access to the room exactly as I had strictly instructed him to do. My mother paused just inside the doorway and took a long, deep breath, closing her eyes for a brief second, as if she was soaking in the pure luxury of the private estate. When she opened her eyes, she immediately began to scan the crowded room completely, ignoring the gorgeous floral arrangements and the beautiful wedding decorations. She was not looking for her daughter. She was not looking for the bride. She was looking for the absolute wealthiest, most influential people in the room so she could begin her aggressive social climbing. I watched as her predatory gaze locked onto table 14. Table 14 was located right near the center of the reception hall, perfectly situated for maximum visibility. But more importantly, table 14 was where David's most prominent relatives were currently seated. His uncle, a massive commercial real estate developer, and his aunt, a senior executive board member of several historic philanthropic foundations, were engaged in a quiet, polite conversation over their expensive champagne. My mother did not know exactly who they were, but she possessed a dark, unnatural talent for sniffing out actual generational wealth. She could spot old money from a mile away. Barbara sharply tapped my father on the arm and pointed directly at the table. She practically dragged him across the crowded dance floor, her emerald dress swishing aggressively behind her. Sarah and Greg followed immediately in their wake, completely ready to play their assigned roles in this pathetic social charade. I sat back in my chair, my heart completely steady, and watched the incredible spectacle unfold from a safe distance. David leaned incredibly close to me, pressing his shoulder against mine in a silent gesture of absolute unwavering support. My mother reached table 14 and inserted herself directly into the conversation without a single moment of hesitation. She flashed a massive, completely fake bright smile, leaning forward to shake hands with David's uncle. Even from across the room, I could read her aggressive body language perfectly. She was projecting the ultimate illusion of a proud, wealthy matriarch. She introduced herself loudly, making sure the surrounding tables could hear her. She proudly declared that she was the mother of the bride, completely ignoring the fact that she had viciously screamed at me and told me I was not real family just a few years ago. I watched David's aunt and uncle exchange a very brief, almost imperceptible glance. They were incredibly polite, sophisticated people who had spent decades navigating elite social circles. But more importantly, they had spent the last 2 years fully briefed by attorney Robert Sterling. They knew exactly who Barbara Hayes was. They knew exactly what she had done to my credit score. They knew about the stolen identity, the forged documents, and the impending federal indictments. And because they were incredibly brilliant people who completely supported me, they played along with absolute flawless perfection. David's aunt smiled warmly and offered my mother a seat at the table. Barbara practically leaped into the empty chair, her face glowing with intense, arrogant victory. She genuinely believed she had just successfully bullied her way into the inner circle of the billionaire elite. She had absolutely no idea that she had just voluntarily strapped herself into the passenger seat of a federal trap. Within 60 seconds, my mother began the aggressive bragging. She gestured wildly toward Greg, pulling him into the spotlight. I knew exactly what she was saying because I had heard the exact same rehearsed speech 1,000 times before. She was telling David's wealthy relatives all about Greg's highly successful boutique financial consulting firm. She was loudly bragging about the sprawling $1.2 million luxury estate that Sarah and Greg had recently purchased in the most exclusive northern suburb of the city. She was painting a vivid, completely fabricated picture of a family deeply rooted in massive financial success. Greg puffed out his chest and reached into his bespoke tuxedo jacket, pulling out a thick stack of premium business cards. He began handing them out to David's relatives, flashing his arrogant, practiced smile. He was desperately trying to secure new, massive investment capital to bail out his completely collapsed, fraudulent business. He thought he was networking his way out of a severe 90-day federal mortgage delinquency. He thought he was the smartest man in the entire room. David's relatives accepted the business cards with polite, graceful nods. They listened attentively to my mother's loud bragging. They offered kind, non-committal responses, letting my family talk themselves deeper and deeper into the massive lie. The sheer agonizing irony of the situation was almost entirely suffocating. My biological family was desperately trying to impress the exact people who were quietly waiting for federal agents to arrest them. I watched this pathetic, embarrassing display of extreme narcissism for over 20 minutes. I did not feel a single ounce of panic. I did not feel the crushing anxiety that used to paralyze me whenever my mother threatened to cause a public scene. Instead, I felt a profound, icy detachment. I was watching a group of completely doomed criminals enthusiastically digging their own graves while wearing designer clothes they bought with my stolen identity. The live jazz band eventually transitioned into a slower, softer melody, signaling the end of the formal dinner service and the beginning of the open reception. Guests began to rise from their tables, moving gracefully toward the massive open bar located near the beautiful floor-to-ceiling windows at the back of the hall. I gently squeezed David's hand, excused myself from our center table, and began walking slowly toward the bar. I needed a glass of sparkling water, and I knew exactly what would happen the second I separated myself from the safety of my new husband. My family had been watching my every single move from the moment they successfully infiltrated the room. They were just waiting for the perfect opportunity to corner me and declare their ultimate victory. I reached the polished marble surface of the bar and quietly asked the bartender for a glass of sparkling water with a slice of lemon. I stood there feeling the heavy, luxurious silk of my custom wedding gown against my skin. I did not have to wait long. Before the bartender could even hand me my glass, I felt a sharp, aggressive presence step directly into my personal space. The heavy, overpowering scent of expensive designer perfume filled the air immediately. I turned my head slowly. My older sister Sarah was standing right next to me, her pale blush silk dress brushing against my own gown. She was holding a tall glass of incredibly expensive vintage champagne, tilting it slightly in her hand. Her golden blonde hair was styled in perfect, elegant waves cascading down her shoulders. But the expression on her face was incredibly ugly. She was wearing a dark, incredibly smug, arrogant smirk that completely twisted her features. She looked me up and down, taking in my beautiful wedding dress, the elegant venue, and the hundreds of wealthy, sophisticated guests. She took a slow, deliberate sip of her champagne, clearly savoring the luxurious taste of the expensive alcohol I had paid for. She leaned in, very close to me, lowering her voice so the bartender could not hear her over the soft jazz music. "You really thought you could keep us out, Chloe?" she whispered, her tone dripping with absolute venomous condescension. I stood perfectly still, keeping my posture incredibly straight. I did not shrink away from her aggressive physical proximity. I simply looked directly into her eyes and waited for her to finish delivering the cruel speech she had clearly been practicing in the car all the way out to the estate. "You actually thought you could just ban us from this property and play pretend with your fancy new billionaire husband," she continued, her smirk growing wider and far more arrogant. "You thought you could just lock the gates and ignore us like we do not even exist. You are so pathetic, Chloe. You have always been pathetic." She took another slow, arrogant sip of her champagne, thoroughly enjoying the sound of her own voice. "Mom has already completely charmed your new mother-in-law." She laughed softly, a cruel, sharp sound that used to make me cry when we were teenagers. "They have been sitting at table 14 talking for 20 minutes. Your new family absolutely loves us. Greg is already setting up a massive lunch meeting with David's incredibly wealthy uncle for next week to discuss a huge commercial real estate partnership. We're already inside the inner circle." Sarah took a step even closer, completely invading my physical space, trying desperately to physically intimidate me the way she always had. Her blue eyes were cold and intensely calculating. "You cannot ever run away from us, Chloe. We are your blood. We are family. You can put on a fancy white dress and rent a gorgeous, expensive estate, but you are still just the boring little accountant who pays our bills when we tell her to. You belong to us. We are family, Chloe. You cannot get rid of us." She finished her terrifying little monologue and stood there staring at me, waiting for my reaction. She fully expected me to completely shatter. She expected my eyes to well up with desperate, panicked tears. She expected me to start hyperventilating and begging her not to ruin my beautiful wedding day. She wanted me to feel entirely trapped, suffocated, and completely powerless against their aggressive manipulation. I looked at my older sister. I looked at the expensive designer dress she was wearing that was actively pushing my stolen social security number toward a massive federal bankruptcy. I looked at the smug, arrogant entitlement practically radiating from her entire body. And for the first time in 29 years, I did not feel a single drop of fear or intimidation. I felt absolutely nothing but a cold, profound, clinical pity. I did not raise my voice. I did not argue with her completely delusional statements. I did not tell her that she was an absolute monster for secretly forging my signature on a $1.2 million residential mortgage and trying to destroy my entire professional accounting career. I did not bother trying to explain to her that David's incredibly wealthy family was actively playing her mother for a complete fool right over at table 14. I simply reached out and politely accepted the crystal glass of sparkling water from the waiting bartender. I held the cold glass in my steady hand, feeling the condensation against my fingers. Then I looked directly into Sarah's cold, calculating blue eyes, and I gave her a slow, genuine, incredibly warm smile. It was the absolute brightest, most peaceful smile I had worn all day. It was the smile of a woman who completely understood that the war was already entirely over and the enemy had absolutely no idea they had completely lost. Sarah's dark, smug smirk faltered just for a tiny fraction of a second. She clearly did not understand my reaction. My absolute total lack of panic deeply confused her. She narrowed her eyes, studying my calm, peaceful face, trying desperately to figure out what game I was playing. I did not say a single word to her. I simply broke our intense eye contact and slowly, casually shifted my gaze across the massive, crowded reception hall. I looked completely past the lively dance floor, past the towering white floral arrangements, and past the incredibly wealthy guests happily mingling with one another. I looked directly at a small, unassuming table tucked neatly into the far-shadowed corner of the grand room. Sitting at that exact table was attorney Robert Sterling. He was wearing an incredibly sharp, dark tailored suit, sitting perfectly still, with his hands resting calmly on the table in front of him. A thick, heavy leather briefcase rested securely by his feet. Sitting immediately to his left and directly to his right were two large, broad-shouldered men wearing serious dark grey suits with small discreet coiled earpieces tucked neatly behind their crisp white collars. They were not drinking champagne. They were not smiling at the wedding decorations. They were federal agents from the Financial Crimes Division, and their eyes were currently locked directly onto my sister Sarah, my mother Barbara, my father Richard, and my brother-in-law Greg. I watched Attorney Sterling hold my gaze from across the massive room. He did not smile, but he gave me one single, incredibly slow, definitive nod of his head. The trap was absolutely, completely closed. There was no escape. I turned my attention back to my confused sister. I took a slow, refreshing sip of my sparkling water, savoring the cool, clean taste against my throat. I looked at Sarah's incredibly expensive stolen dress and her arrogant posture. "You are absolutely right, Sarah." I finally whispered, my voice incredibly soft and perfectly calm. "You are family." I took one step back, smoothly creating a solid physical boundary between us. And family always gets exactly what they deserve. The soft, melodic hum of the live jazz band floated gracefully through the massive vaulted ceilings of the grand reception hall. The incredible multi-course dinner service had just concluded, and the catering staff was moving silently through the room, clearing the fine china and pouring fresh vintage champagne into every crystal glass. The entire atmosphere of the private estate was completely bathed in a warm, romantic golden light. David's best man had just finished delivering a beautiful, hilarious, and deeply moving toast that left half the room wiping away happy tears. The guests were relaxed, joyful, and completely, entirely unaware of the massive storm that was about to break right inside the venue. I sat at the center table with David, feeling the heavy, profound weight of the impending collision pressing firmly against my chest. I looked across the sprawling dance floor and locked my eyes directly onto table 14. My mother, Barbara, had been practically vibrating with greedy, aggressive anticipation all night. She had spent the entire dinner service talking loudly over David's prominent, wealthy relatives, bragging relentlessly about Greg's completely fabricated financial success. And now that the formal toasts had officially begun, I knew exactly what her narcissism was demanding her to do next. She could not simply sit in the audience and watch someone else receive attention. She desperately needed to center herself in the narrative. She needed to prove to all the billionaires in the room that she was the absolute flawless matriarch, responsible for this spectacular high society wedding. As the best man smiled and handed the microphone back to the event coordinator, my mother made her move. She stood up abruptly from table 14, smoothing the front of her expensive stolen emerald green designer gown. She threw her shoulders back, pasted an enormous, completely fake, joyful smile across her face, and began marching aggressively directly toward the main stage. She had absolutely no right to be up there. She was entirely uninvited to this wedding. She had crashed my beautiful private ceremony through sheer toxic audacity and threatened to destroy my character if I did not let her network with my new in-laws. But in her deeply delusional mind, this was her ultimate grand moment. She was going to deliver a performative, tearful mother of the bride speech to charm the elite crowd and permanently cement her fake social status. I did not wait for her to reach the stairs. I did not sit back and let her steal my moment. I stood up slowly from my chair. David looked up at me and gave my hand one final firm, reassuring squeeze. I gathered the heavy, luxurious silk of my custom wedding dress and walked purposefully across the polished hardwood floor, intercepting her exact path. My heart was pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, but my mind was completely freezing cold and intensely clear. I reached the microphone stand just a few seconds before she did, taking the cold metal handle firmly into my grip. My mother froze at the bottom of the stage steps. Her fake smile faltered for a tiny fraction of a second, her eyes flashing with sharp, immediate irritation because I had blocked her grand entrance. But because hundreds of wealthy guests were currently watching us, she quickly recovered her composure. She actually reached her hand out toward me, gesturing for me to hand her the microphone. She whispered loudly enough for the entire front row to hear that she had prepared a very special, beautiful speech for her darling daughter. I did not hand her the microphone. I did not step aside. I stood perfectly still on the elevated stage, looking down at the woman who had thrown me out into the freezing rain and completely betrayed my entire existence. I turned my back to her and faced the 200 elegant, sophisticated guests filling the massive reception hall. The live jazz music faded away into absolute total silence. the cheerful hum of wealthy conversation completely stopped. Every single eye in the enormous room was locked directly onto me. The tension in the air was so incredibly thick, it felt hard to breathe. I took a slow, deep breath, holding the microphone close to my mouth. My voice echoed through the massive state-of-the-art sound system, clear, steady, and carrying an absolute chilling authority. I want to thank everyone for being here today to celebrate this beautiful new chapter with us, I said, looking across the sea of friendly, expectant faces. Growing up, my mother, Barbara, taught me a very specific, strict lesson about family. She taught me over and over again that important events are for real family only. I paused intentionally, letting the heavy words settle across the quiet room. Directly behind me, I heard my mother let out a soft, pleased little sigh. Her absolute blinding narcissism made her genuinely believe that I was publicly validating her. She actually thought I was honoring her in front of David's wealthy relatives. She thought she had completely won. But what my mother did not teach me, I continued, my voice dropping into a razor-sharp, completely serious tone, is that her specific version of family is built entirely on federal fraud. The entire room let out a massive collective gasp. The sound of 200 people sharply inhaling all at once vibrated through the crystal chandeliers above us. The heavy, suffocating silence that immediately followed was completely deafening. Directly behind me, I heard my mother let out a strange, choked noise, like all the air had just been violently punched out of her lungs. I turned my head slightly to look down at her. The arrogant smugness had been entirely wiped away from her features. Her face had gone completely chalk white. She was staring up at me with raw, unadulterated, wide-eyed panic. Sarah and Greg, who had been standing near the edge of the dance floor waiting for Barbara's grand speech, completely froze in their tracks. My father, Richard, looked like his legs were about to entirely give out beneath him. They finally realized the horrifying truth. I was not the terrified, submissive little girl they could bully into silence anymore. I had the microphone. I had the audience. And I had the absolute truth. I did not break eye contact with my pale, shaking mother. I simply raised my free hand and made a subtle, deliberate gesture toward the shadowed back corner of the grand room. Attorney Robert Sterling stood up immediately from his small, unassuming table. He calmly buttoned his dark, tailored suit jacket with absolute professional precision. Right beside him, the two large, broad-shouldered men in the dark suits stood up as well. They moved with terrifying, highly coordinated efficiency. They did not rush or run. They walked across the polished hardwood floor with the heavy, undeniable weight of absolute federal authority. My mother watched them approach, her eyes darting frantically around the massive room, desperately searching for an escape route that simply did not exist. The two federal agents completely bypassed the elegant guest tables and walked directly up to the front of the stage surrounding my mother, my father, Sarah, and Greg. The lead agent reached inside his breast pocket and pulled out a thick, heavy stack of officially sealed legal documents. He did not whisper quietly to spare their feelings. He spoke in a loud, clear, authoritative voice that echoed relentlessly across the completely silent reception hall. Barbara Hayes, Richard Hayes, Sarah Montgomery, and Gregory Montgomery, the agent announced loudly, holding the paperwork forward. You are all officially being served with massive federal indictments. The entire wedding party watched in absolute stunned fascination as the agent continued reading from his official documents. You are being federally indicted today for felony identity theft, felony wire fraud, and active conspiracy to commit federal mortgage fraud. The agent stated, his voice perfectly flat and clinical. You have illegally forged highly sensitive financial documents to secure a $1.2 million residential loan using stolen Social Security credentials. The second federal agent immediately reached to his heavy leather belt and pulled out 2 pairs of heavy, cold metal handcuffs. The sharp, metallic clicking sound echoed loudly in the quiet room. The total, absolute collapse of my biological family's fake high society facade happened in a matter of mere seconds. Greg let out a high-pitched, completely panicked, whimpering noise. He frantically turned his head, looking wildly around the luxurious room. His terrified eyes locked directly onto a group of older, distinguished men sitting at table 4. Those specific men were Greg's highly coveted, wealthy business partners. They were the exact prominent elite investors he had been desperately trying to impress and secure massive capital from all night. They were personal guests of David's family. And right now, They were staring at Greg with absolute unvarnished horror and total disgust. Greg realized in that exact agonizing moment that his entire professional and social life was completely, permanently destroyed. The wealthy elite he worshipped had just watched him get federally indicted for severe financial crimes right in the middle of a wedding reception. There was absolutely no coming back from this. He was a complete social pariah. Sarah completely lost any remaining shred of her arrogant composure. She started shaking so violently she could barely stand up straight. She began sobbing openly, pointing her finger directly at her own husband. "I did not know anything about the forged documents," Sarah cried out, her voice high and desperate, trying pathetically to throw Greg entirely under the bus to save herself. "He told me he handled all the paperwork. He told me we had the money." Greg stared at his wife with absolute terrified betrayal. But before he could argue back, the second agent firmly grabbed his wrists and locked the heavy metal cuffs around them. Greg began to openly aggressively sob right there on the pristine hardwood floor. My father, Richard, offered absolutely no resistance at all. He simply hung his head, staring blankly at his expensive polished shoes in absolute silent crushing shame as the agent secured his hands behind his back. He had traded his entire relationship with his daughter for a fake luxury life, and now he was going to federal prison for it. But my mother, Barbara, did not go quietly. She absolutely, completely lost her mind. The reality of the trap had finally snapped her fragile, narcissistic ego in half. She started screaming at the absolute top of her lungs, crying massive, hysterical tears, and pointing an angry, shaking finger directly up at me on the stage. "She is lying!" Barbara shrieked, her voice echoing terribly through the beautiful room. "She is a horrible, ungrateful, psychotic daughter. She made all of this up because she is completely jealous of her sister. We did not steal anything. She told us we could use her credit. She is trying to ruin us." She desperately turned toward table 14, looking wildly at David's elegant mother and his prominent, wealthy uncle. "You have to believe me," Barbara pleaded, her voice cracking with raw, ugly desperation. "She is manipulating all of you. She is destroying our family. Please do not let her do this to us." She genuinely, desperately thought her victim routine would still work. She thought if she cried loud enough and screamed hard enough, the wealthy people in the room would feel sorry for her and turn against me. But the elite billionaires and highly educated professionals sitting in that room did not see a poor victimized mother. They saw a hysterical, completely unhinged criminal throwing a massive, desperate temper tantrum after being caught stealing from her own child. David's mother simply looked at Barbara with an expression of absolute freezing, icy disdain. She did not say a single word. She did not have to. Her total lack of sympathy spoke volumes. The federal agents did not tolerate my mother screaming for another second. They moved swiftly and securely, grasping Barbara's arms and forcefully pulling them behind her back. She struggled wildly, kicking her expensive designer heels against the floor, but the agents easily overpowered her. The sharp, final metallic click of the handcuffs locking tightly around her wrists was the most beautiful, satisfying sound I had ever heard in my entire life. "You cannot do this to me!" Barbara screamed as the agents began to physically march her toward the exit. "I am the mother of the bride. You cannot do this." I stood completely still on the stage, holding the microphone and watching them drag her away. "You stopped being my mother the day you stole my future to buy a house," I replied, my voice completely calm, carrying easily over her frantic screaming. The federal agents silently and highly efficiently escorted all four of them completely out of the beautiful, luxurious venue. The heavy wooden double doors swung shut behind them with a loud, solid thud, officially sealing them completely out of my life forever. I stood on the elevated stage, taking a massive, deep, cleansing breath. The air inside the reception hall suddenly felt incredibly light and beautifully pure. The heavy, dark, toxic tumor that had severely poisoned my entire existence for 29 long years was finally officially entirely excised. I did not feel sad. I did not feel guilty. I felt an absolute overwhelming sense of profound, permanent peace. I looked out at the silent, stunned crowd, and then I looked down at my new husband. David was standing by our beautifully decorated table, smiling up at me with absolute pure adoration and fierce, unwavering pride. He reached his hand out toward me, completely ready to start our beautiful new life together. The absolute worst nightmare of my past was completely, entirely over. Justice had finally been served, and the beautiful, vibrant future was entirely mine to claim. If you are watching this and you have ever had to strictly cut a deeply toxic person completely out of your life to successfully protect your own mental peace, I want you to know that you are absolutely not alone. Setting incredibly firm boundaries with family is never cruel. It is simply basic survival. Please hit that like button and solidly subscribe if you completely believe that absolute justice always finds a brilliant way in the very end. And drop a quick comment below right now telling me exactly where you are watching from and what time it is there. I promise I read every single one. Now let me tell you what true absolute freedom finally feels like. The heavy oak doors of the grand reception hall clicked shut, sealing my toxic biological family out of my life forever. The sound was incredibly soft, but it echoed in my mind like the booming strike of a massive judge's gavel. As I stood there in my beautiful custom silk wedding gown, holding the warm, steady hand of my wonderful new husband, David, I took the first truly deep breath I had ever taken in 29 years. The suffocating, crushing weight of being the unappreciated family scapegoat instantly vanished. I was no longer the desperate daughter shivering in the freezing rain outside a luxury country club. I was a strong, independent professional woman who had successfully protected her future, and the consequences for the people who tried to destroy me were just beginning to unfold. The federal justice system moves with a slow, grinding, absolute precision, but when it finally strikes, it strikes with devastating, unyielding force. Because the massive mortgage fraud had been completely exposed in a highly public setting with federal agents actively securing the arrests, the banking institution that held the loan wasted absolutely no time. When a major federal lender discovers that the primary guarantor's signature on a $1.2 million jumbo mortgage was entirely forged, they do not offer sympathetic payment plans. They do not sit down to negotiate friendly terms. They immediately trigger an aggressive acceleration clause. Attorney Robert Sterling kept me entirely updated on the spectacular legal fallout over the next several months. The bank officially called in the entire massive balance of the loan. Greg and Sarah were legally mandated to produce $1.2 million in cash within 30 days. Naturally, they did not have a single dime to their names. Greg's fake boutique financial consulting firm was already entirely bankrupt, and his wealthy, prominent business partners, the exact same men who had watched him get arrested in handcuffs at my wedding, had completely severed all professional ties. The bank seized the sprawling luxury mansion immediately. I heard through Attorney Sterling that moving trucks arrived early one Tuesday morning to aggressively repossess everything, including the imported custom nursery furniture that Sarah had bought using maxed-out credit cards. Greg faced severe, catastrophic federal charges. The prosecutors built an airtight, ironclad case proving multiple counts of wire fraud, bank fraud, and aggravated identity theft. The arrogant man who used to mock my modest lifestyle and brag endlessly about his fake generational wealth was entirely stripped of his custom-tailored suits. He was sentenced to 84 months in a federal penitentiary. There were no country clubs in federal prison. There was only the cold, hard reality of the criminal choices he had made. My sister Sarah, the eternal golden child who was always pampered and protected from every single consequence, suddenly found herself staring into an absolute terrifying abyss. When she realized that Greg was going to prison and that their bank accounts were permanently frozen by federal investigators, she panicked. She immediately filed for a desperate, messy divorce, trying fruitlessly to save herself from the sinking ship. But she was deeply complicit in the identity theft. The bankruptcy court ruthlessly seized her expensive designer clothes, her diamond jewelry, and her leased luxury vehicles to pay back the heavily defrauded creditors. Sarah was forced to move into a cheap, rundown motel on the far industrial outskirts of the city. She had to take a grueling minimum-wage retail job just to afford basic groceries for herself and her baby. The golden sister who had smirked at me while drinking my expensive champagne, who had arrogantly declared that I would always just be the boring accountant who paid her bills, was now living in a dingy motel room with peeling wallpaper and flickering neon lights outside her window. She was completely alone, entirely broke, and permanently stripped of the glamorous high society identity she had committed federal crimes to achieve. But the ultimate poetic justice was reserved entirely for my parents. Richard and Barbara faced an even more humiliating and absolute destruction. They were slapped with massive federal fines and aggressive crushing penalties from the Internal Revenue Service because they had actively, knowingly participated in stealing my social security number to facilitate the fraudulent mortgage. The government held them heavily financially liable. To pay their mounting criminal defense fees and federal restitution, my parents were forced to liquidate absolutely everything they owned. They had to sell their own home, the house I grew up in, at a massive, devastating loss. My father lost his comfortable retirement completely. For my mother, Barbara, however, the financial ruin was absolutely nothing compared to the complete devastation of her social standing. The news of their dramatic, humiliating arrest at my high society wedding spread through their elite country club community like a massive, uncontrollable wildfire. The wealthy socialites my mother had worshipped for decades, including her precious Mrs. Kensington, immediately blocked her phone number. The country club permanently revoked their membership, citing a strict morality and criminal conduct clause. My mother desperately tried to call her former wealthy friends, spinning ridiculous, frantic lies, claiming it was all a terrible misunderstanding and that I had maliciously set them up. Absolutely nobody answered her calls. When Barbara walked through the local upscale grocery store, people would actually turn their shopping carts around and walk down different aisles just to avoid making any eye contact with her. She became an absolute complete social pariah. The deeply narcissistic woman who valued public appearances and country club gossip over her own daughter's safety was forced to live out her remaining years in total public disgrace and absolute poverty. She had sacrificed her real family for the illusion of wealth, and in the end, she was left with absolutely nothing. While their corrupt, toxic world violently burned to the ground, my life transformed into a beautiful, peaceful sanctuary. Thanks to the meticulous documentation provided by Attorney Sterling and the conclusive, undeniable findings of the federal investigation, a federal judge issued a comprehensive court order officially declaring me a victim of severe identity theft. The fraudulent million-dollar mortgage was completely and permanently scrubbed from my financial records. My pristine 800 credit score was entirely restored. My professional license as a certified public accountant remained completely, perfectly untouched. David and I returned from a breathtaking, incredibly romantic 3-week honeymoon in the Mediterranean. We came back to the city completely refreshed, deeply connected, and ready to start our new chapter. We combined our hard-earned savings and purchased our absolute dream home. It is a beautiful, spacious, historic property surrounded by tall, ancient oak trees and vibrant, lush gardens. We intentionally chose a location far away from the toxic northern suburbs, where my family used to desperately try to impress the elite. We established a strict, highly secure legal trust to completely shield our assets and our property from any future frivolous claims or attempted contact. We installed a state-of-the-art security system at our new home, not out of fear, but simply to guarantee our absolute total privacy. My biological family has absolutely no idea where I live. They have no current phone number for me. They have absolutely no way to contact me. They have no access to my profound joy, my professional success, or my unconditional love. I spend my weekend mornings sitting on my beautiful sunlit patio, drinking hot coffee, holding my wonderful husband's hand, and feeling a deep, profound sense of gratitude. The heavy, suffocating burden of being the designated family scapegoat, the unappreciated fixer, the walking wallet, is completely, entirely gone. I no longer flinch when my phone rings. I no longer spend my precious free time untangling their chaotic, self-inflicted financial disasters. I am finally, completely, absolutely free. Looking back on that freezing afternoon, standing in the rain outside the country club, holding a heavy, ruined gift box, I realized that it was the greatest defining moment of my entire life. That was the exact moment I finally decided to choose myself. I learned that you cannot buy love from people who view you entirely as an appliance. You cannot earn respect from people who fundamentally do not respect themselves. True family does not steal your identity to fund a fake lifestyle, and true family does not threaten to destroy your happiness when you finally set a boundary. If you are watching this and you have spent years breaking your own back to carry the heavy toxic burdens of people who never once say thank you, I need you to listen to me very carefully. You do not owe your future to the people who actively try to destroy your present. Setting firm absolute boundaries with toxic family members is not an act of revenge. It is an act of pure necessary survival. You have every single right to walk away from a table where respect is no longer being served. You have the right to build a beautiful, peaceful life completely free from their manipulation. Please hit that like button and absolutely subscribe to this channel if you believe that the truth always comes to light and that genuine justice always finds a way. I want to hear from every single one of you in the comments below. Have you ever had to firmly walk away from family members who only viewed you as a resource? Let me know where you are watching from right now and what time it is there in your part of the world. Thank you so much for staying with me through this entire incredible journey. Remember, your peace is your most valuable asset. Protect it with everything you have and never ever apologize for choosing your own happiness. Until next time, take beautiful care of yourselves. It has been a long time since that chaotic, beautiful wedding day, and the dust has finally settled completely. Sometimes I sit in the quiet warmth of my beautiful new home and I just listen to the absolute silence. For 29 years of my life, silence was never actually peaceful. Silence was always a heavy, terrifying warning sign. It meant that my mother Barbara was currently brewing a new spectacular crisis. It meant that my sister Sarah was plotting another manipulative way to drain my bank account. It meant that I was about to be harshly punished for some imaginary slight, or some failure to meet their impossible moving targets. But today, the silence in my home is just silence. It is the pure, unfiltered sound of absolute total safety. I look around at the beautiful life David and I have built together, and I feel a profound, overwhelming sense of gratitude. The heavy, dark rain cloud that followed me for my entire existence has completely evaporated. The toxic roots that my biological family planted in my mind have been entirely pulled up and destroyed forever. I am no longer the anxious, terrified girl standing in the freezing rain holding a ruined silver gift box. I am a successful professional woman who stared down the absolute worst kind of betrayal and emerged completely victorious. For so many years, I genuinely believed that my situation was entirely my own fault. I am sure many of you watching this right now can deeply relate to that incredibly heavy burden. When you grow up as the designated family scapegoat, you are conditioned from a very young age to believe that you are inherently flawed. You are told that your only real value comes from exactly what you can provide to the golden children of the family. I look into the camera right now, and I want to say this directly to anyone who needs to hear it today. I spent my whole life thinking if I just sacrificed a little more, they would see my value. I thought if I just worked a little harder, if I just paid one more overdue electric bill, if I just spent one more beautiful spring weekend doing their complicated taxes for free, they would finally look at me with genuine love. I thought I could literally buy their affection through sheer endless acts of service. I was so incredibly desperate for a tiny crumb of parental validation that I was completely willing to set myself on fire just to keep them warm. But the devastating truth that I had to learn the absolute hardest way possible is that people who view you as a tool will never view you as a person. Narcissists do not possess the basic human capacity for unconditional empathy or genuine love. They look at their own children and they only see convenient practical appliances. They look at you and they strictly calculate exactly how much money, how much energy, and how much social status they can extract from your existence. When my parents stole my social security number to secure a $1.2 million fraudulent mortgage for Sarah and Greg, they did not think about my future for a single second. They did not care that a massive federal foreclosure would instantly, permanently destroy my hard-earned career as a certified public accountant. They did not care that I could have faced severe legal consequences or a catastrophic federal bankruptcy. They just saw a pristine credit score sitting there unused, and they simply decided they were absolutely entitled to take it. I was just a walking wallet to them. I was a quiet, compliant financial ghost meant to completely prop up their fake luxury lifestyle. Society places a massive, completely unfair burden on the victims of severe family abuse. We are constantly told from the time we are little children that blood is thicker than water. We are told that family is absolutely everything, and that we must always forgive and forget, no matter how terribly we are treated by the people who raised us. People who have never experienced the suffocating darkness of a highly toxic narcissistic family dynamic will always try to pressure you into simply keeping the peace. They will tell you that you only get one mother or one father and that you will deeply regret walking away from them. But I am here to tell you with absolute crystal clear certainty that blood does not give anyone the right to destroy your life or your future. Sharing basic genetics with someone does not grant them a permanent, unlimited access pass to abuse you, steal from you, or ruin your mental health. You do not owe your absolute destruction to anyone just because you happen to share the exact same last name. Setting boundaries is not cruel, it is survival. When I finally drew a hard, absolute line in the sand and told my mother she was not invited to my wedding, I was not doing it to be malicious or petty. I was doing it because my very survival depended entirely on keeping her toxic, destructive chaos completely out of my sacred safe space. When I silently worked with attorney Robert Sterling and the federal investigators for 2 grueling, exhausting years, I was not doing it out of spite or revenge. I was doing it to legally and permanently sever myself from a massive financial crime that would have ruined my entire life. Protecting your own peace, your own finances, and your own future is the most fundamental, essential right you possess as a living human being. The people who get fiercely angry at you for setting firm boundaries are exactly the people who are heavily benefiting from you having none at all. When you finally stand up and say enough is enough, the toxic people in your life will always call you selfish. They will call you crazy and ungrateful. They will try to completely rewrite the narrative to make you look like the ultimate villain to anyone who will listen. Let them talk. Their false narrative does not matter anymore because you are completely, genuinely free from their control. When those serious federal agents marched my screaming, hysterical mother, my silent, defeated father, my sobbing sister, and my absolutely terrified brother-in-law out of my beautiful wedding reception, the air in the room instantly, permanently changed. It was like a heavy, dark, polluted smog had been sucked completely out of the elegant venue. And sometimes taking out the trash is the only way to breathe clean air. You cannot heal in the exact same toxic environment that made you sick in the first place. You cannot build a beautiful, secure, stable future while constantly carrying the heavy, rotting weight of manipulative people who actively want to drag you down into the mud with them. Removing toxic family members from your life creates a massive, beautiful, empty space. And in that wonderful, peaceful space, you can finally begin to carefully cultivate relationships that are based on genuine mutual respect and true, unselfish, unconditional love. David and his wonderful, incredibly supportive parents taught me what real, true family actually looks like. They did not need my money. They did not need me to fix their endless problems or silently balance their checkbooks. They simply wanted me exactly as I was. They embraced me with completely open arms and supported me fiercely through the absolute darkest, most terrifying chapters of the intense federal investigation. Real family does not forge your signature on federal banking documents to buy a mansion they cannot afford. Real family does not demand that you empty your precious savings account to fund a fake luxury aesthetic for their wealthy country club friends. Real family stands right beside you in the absolute worst storm and helps you build a solid, unshakable foundation for your future. I had to endure 29 incredibly long years of emotional starvation to finally understand the magnificent, fulfilling taste of genuine love. And now that I finally have it, I will protect it with every single fiber of my being for the rest of my life. I share this incredibly personal, deeply painful story with all of you because I know with absolute unwavering certainty that I am not the only person who has survived this exact kind of nightmare. Financial abuse within families is a silent, insidious, hidden epidemic. So many parents and older entitled siblings secretly open credit cards, take out massive personal loans, or entirely ruin the credit histories of the very people they are supposed to love and protect. If you are listening to this right now and you have a nagging suspicious feeling deep in your gut, I strongly urge you to pull your comprehensive credit report today. Do not wait for a disaster to strike. Do not let blind family loyalty prevent you from actively protecting your own financial identity. You must be your own fierce, relentless advocate because the people who view you as a convenient tool will never hesitate to sacrifice you completely for their own selfish gain. Look at the numbers, look closely at the facts, and have the immense, incredible courage to act on them before it is too late. It takes an unbelievable, astronomical amount of strength to finally walk away from the only family you have ever known. There will inevitably be moments of profound, heavy grief. There will be quiet, lonely nights where you mourn the loving parents and the supportive siblings you truly deserved but never actually had. That grief is completely normal and entirely valid. It is a necessary part of the long healing process. But I promise you that on the other side of that painful mourning period is a life of absolute, radiant, spectacular freedom. Today, I wake up every single morning with a light, joyful, peaceful heart. My professional career as a corporate accountant is thriving completely unburdened by the terrifying looming threat of a federal bankruptcy. The federal judgment officially entirely cleared my credit report, washing away every single trace of Greg and Sarah's massive fraudulent debt. My beautiful marriage to David grows stronger and more incredibly fulfilling with every passing day. We travel, we laugh, we build our warm home, and we live completely entirely on our own terms. The massive, luxurious estate that my sister and Greg tried to steal using my good name has long since been completely foreclosed and sold to someone else. They lost absolutely everything because their entire existence was built on a fragile, rotting foundation of lies, greed, and blatant theft. I kept my integrity, I kept my truth, and in the profound, beautiful end, I kept my amazing life. I look back at the young girl shivering in the freezing rain, holding that heavy, ruined silver gift box outside the glowing country club. And I just want to wrap my arms tightly around her. I want to tell her that the agonizing, sharp pain of that cruel rejection was actually the greatest, most incredible gift she could have ever received. That harsh rejection finally broke the powerful, traumatic bond that kept her tightly chained to their endless toxic demands. It forcefully opened her eyes to the cold, calculating reality of their severe financial abuse. It gave her the necessary furious anger and the brilliant, sharp focus to pull her credit report to find the blatantly forged documents and to silently, meticulously build an ironclad federal case against her abusers. She did not just survive the terrible storm. She completely, entirely mastered it. And if you are currently standing in your own dark, freezing storm, feeling completely unloved and entirely discarded, I promise you that you have that exact same massive power deep inside of you right now. You are so much stronger than the people who desperately try to break you. You are deeply worthy of a life that is peaceful, respectful, and profoundly beautiful. Thank you so much for staying with me until the end. Sharing this long, incredibly difficult journey has been deeply healing for me, and I genuinely hope that my words have brought some measure of comfort, absolute clarity, or warm validation to your own life. If my story resonated with you, or if you have ever had to cut off toxic family members to protect your own peace, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps more than you know. Building a strong, incredibly supportive community where we can openly share these hard truths and uplift one another is so absolutely vital. We heal by shining a bright, undeniable light on the dark, ugly secrets that toxic families try so desperately to keep forever hidden. And I want to hear from you. If your family secretly put a massive debt in your name, what would you do? Would you try to handle it quietly within the family, or would you go straight to the legal authorities to protect yourself? Let me know in the comments, and do not forget to tell me where you are watching from and what time it is there. I absolutely love seeing how far these stories travel across the world and connecting with all of you in the comments section. Please always remember to carefully guard your heart fiercely, protect your financial future, and never ever let anyone convince you that you deserve to be treated like a disposable object. Take beautiful care of yourselves. You deserve it.